somewhere in the puzzle that we're trying to compose. So this is the tweet. I'm increasingly thinking that every functioning system has two forms: the abstraction that outsiders are led to believe, and the reality that insiders actually and carefully operate. You don't incrementally learn a system, you eventually unlearn its necessary lies. And there's also more comments in this Twitter thread, and I like also I like to like the first follow up. There's more. So if you go on Twitter and search for Dakami, you will find more. But I also like this extra comment. I place a high premium on honesty, but I also like things that work. And I think that this is a comment that this tweet is not something that I believe you can take fully at face value, because if you do agree on it, you cannot fully take it at face value. I think I don't know if the conundrum here, if I only see this conundrum here, or if it's obvious. But in any case, I think this is an amazing comment, and maybe this is today's backdrop for the interview. Final point about transparency, honesty. The last interview with Abner was more structured. We had a set of points that we wanted to go over and that were agreed upon beforehand. And from there, we had the interview, and some questions were like off script, some others were some things that we knew we wanted to go over. Today is different. Jonathan has been doing interviews of his own on his own channel, and he has this style where he just does the interview without a set schedule, a set a list of things that he has to go over. So for this interview, I was curious and I wanted to try the same style. And the idea is that I don't know if I end up in a situation where I don't know how to proceed with the conversation. I think I'm sure that he'll be able to pull me out of any problem since he's used to this style. But yeah, today I wanted to try this. So heads up, just so you know. With this, I think we can go into the interview itself. So the interview is, oh no, I selected the wrong thing. Never mind. You haven't seen anything. There we go. Oh, okay. Let's go. The community Backstage, JT. Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
How's it going?
Oh, not bad here. Not bad. Well, actually, it's been a weird week. I have trouble sleeping, but people don't care. So, how it's been for you?
It's been good. It's been good. I think some people may know this already, but yeah, I announced that I was leaving Microsoft like a month or so ago. So I have been full time working on projects like the YouTube channel and Nushell, which we may talk about a little bit later. But
Yeah.
it's been good. It's been good.
How is it flying solo? Is it scary?
Yeah, it's scary. I feel like there's you have to learn a whole bunch of stuff. You get so used to kind of the corporate warm blanket, and then when you step outside of that into the brisk, cold reality of the world, you're like, oh, I have to learn how to do a bunch of new things I didn't know before for all this to work. But in that sense, you also have to trust yourself. You have to lean on your own intuition and hope that you can learn from your mistakes along the way, and often you do. So, so far it's been scary, but it's not been scary in a way that's like paralyzing. It's been scary in a way that kind of says, okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's brace, let's get ready, let's learn, and then let's do the next thing.
I see. Okay, I guess maybe we should start from the beginning. I leave it to you to decide precisely what the beginning should be. But so I think when we were discussing about this interview, you mentioned that you worked on TypeScript and then Rust. Can you like give a simplified version of the storyline so people can understand where you're coming from?
Yeah, just kind of a brief overview, and then we can kind of dig into any particular topic that sounds of interest to folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I so in I graduated university at around 2000, And by 2006, I had started on a journey that was going to carry me like the next 15 plus years, which was I was using a programming language. I was a little un happy with what it could do, and I wanted it to do a little bit more. So I started working on my own programming language on the side, and then I worked on another one, and another one, and another one, and that kind of started this, many year adventure of working in programming languages. So I went to grad school and got a degree in it, and then I went and worked at Microsoft, and I joined the TypeScript team at 2012, about May of 2012. So this is before it was even released. It was still called Strata. There was like all of three teams using it a little bit at the time. So I got to help create TypeScript with that team and help them finish the public release, put it out, and then I worked on TypeScript for 3.5 years after that. Left and then worked at Mozilla and worked on the Rust project and helped them transition Rust from being an academic language aspiring to be an industrial strength language, kind of like help them in some of the transitions that you need to do to carry a language to be industrial. And worked on that for a while and participated in, like, the community team and stuff like that.
What would
And
be where your like the things that you were doing with Rust?
so with Rust, there's kind of the public facing stuff I was doing, and then there's like more private stuff that I was doing.
Mm-hmm. So the
So the
public
more public
lies and the actual work.
yeah, exactly. Hint, hint. There's a lot of the community backstage. But yeah, there is the sense of okay. So the public stuff that I was doing was things like designing the error messages, working on the language server uh, aspect, working on the survey. Um, I worked on Servo for a while. There's another Rust thing that I did. I can't remember off the top of my head. But backstage, you had a group of really intelligent folks that had, a lot of ambitions for Rust, but had never built a community, had never worked in a successful language like that before. So what I was doing was I was bringing a lot of experience from Microsoft and some uh, some good experiences and some, like, mistakes that we made, and then sharing that with the leaders of the Rust team at the time. So like the Rust core team, I was friends with most of the Rust core team and just kind of sharing my experience with them so that they could lean on that as they started to make decisions. Now, of course, I was not the only person that they were leaning on, but that was a lot of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes was to let them hear some of the experience of what it was like to build and grow TypeScript to, a million plus users. They had that they could, that they could draw from. So there was that. And I'll just also briefly mention this. We may or may not necessarily go into it, but as I stayed in Mozilla, one of the things that I also helped do was to, I guess, like run the Mozilla research. There was like a set of us engineers and leads that helped run Mozilla research. Um, trying to pick the projects, trying to really set the direction for Mozilla research. And as part of that, one of the things I was doing was helping establish Rust inside of Mozilla so it could last long enough as a project to eventually move out into a foundation. So
Hmm.
um, that path, that was one of the things I kind of helped with. That wasn't
Okay.
like the main thing, but yeah,
To help me understand a little bit better, and please, if these are questions that you don't want to answer, just say it. It's fine. But
sure.
like, what was then your title at Mozilla?
So my title at Mozilla was something like the equivalent of principal engineer.
Okay,
Um, so it's like a fairly senior level
VIP
engineer.
engineer. Hmm.
Yeah, not like top engineer, but yeah, pretty good.
Okay. Okay. So, and you said that you were working um, with the Rust project, and also with I don't know, should we call them groups? Does does that work?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so
Yeah,
the Rust
separate
group
teams.
and the research group, Mozilla research group.
Yeah, so you could kind of think in at the time the way that Mozilla was structured, you had, of course, the main section of it was working on Firefox, and then there were these little offshoot parts of it. And one of the offshoot parts was Mozilla Research. So it's kind
Hmm.
of an umbrella of projects. So it included things like um, AV1, which was like the video codec,
Yeah.
and Servo, which was the web browser engine, Rust. I'm blanking like two or three others that are also important, but forgive my brain fog. But yeah, there's a couple others
Hmm.
in that umbrella of different researchers that work on these
Yeah.
projects.
Um, how many jumps between you and the CEO?
Between me and the CEO, 3.
3 jumps. Okay, so yeah. So sorry. The reason why I'm asking this question is I just I don't want to like dissect too much your specific position. I was asking this more as a proxy to understand how many layers there were above the Rust group. And I'll get to that later because I'm asking the reason why I'm asking this. Okay, so you work on this stuff. That's awesome. Sorry, I interrupted you with this question about Rust specifically while you were telling me about like your storyline, right? You said that you work on TypeScript, then you went to Mozilla and Rust. Is there anything else that you want to continue?
Um, well, I guess the last thing to mention is so I worked on Rust. I left Mozilla, did a little bit more at Microsoft on developer experience kinds of stuff, designing APIs. At the same time, I was working with some folks, Yehuda Katz, um, who helped create the modern Ruby on Rails and Ember and a whole bunch of other stuff. So we had been friends because of working together on the JavaScript team. Um, so when I was working on TypeScript, I guess we could talk about that a little bit. So I was working on TypeScript at Microsoft. As part of that, I was on TC39, which is the JavaScript committee. So the team, like the committee of folks that designs the JavaScript language. So I was on that for a few years. So Yehuda and I met there, and then later create this kind of like hybrid programming language shell thing called Nushell. So that's basically what I spend most of my time on these days is the Nushell project.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So so you said that you left Microsoft, and now you're flying solo. Uh, is there any particular reason why I get the impression that basically you left big tech for good? Am I wrong?
I think that's pretty safe. To kind of actually pull that apart and to see why, I it's a little tricky because like I'm still trying to figure out everything you know, where I have kind of like made the decision out of instinct and then understood it in hindsight. But yeah, at the time, I was really realizing that for me, having the flexibility to design my day was so much more important to me. And if I had the flexibility to live really simply, like I kind of called it retire, which is, I'm not sure that's true. It just sounded like the right way to describe it. In a sense, I guess it's like retiring from big tech, like retiring from um, working in that environment and then trying to design a lifestyle that is kind of like a long-term sustainable lifestyle that actually lets me do the amount of volunteerism, the amount of of just kind of content creation and that kind of stuff that I wanted to be able to do. And to do that, you had to kind of like cut loose from all the responsibilities that you have in a corporate setting. Obviously, there's a lot of day-to-day responsibilities, but there's also the drag on who you are as a person. There's a lot of um well, let's kind of talk about this a bit because I think one of the things when I was talking to Andreas, he really inspired me to just kind of speak straight and share some of the experience itself, because I think once you do, it kind of resonates. So last year, um, I was diagnosed with being on the autistic spectrum, and that has been extremely life changing for me in a way that I would not have been able to predict. And one of the things that I realized is that for a long time, I have been creating a kind of mask between myself and other people. Now, on the autistic spectrum, that's completely normal. So, an autist has to do that in order to interact socially, because a lot of people are not autistic and don't understand how our brains function and how we want to communicate with the world, how we want to express, like how our body wants to express in the world. Um, and so I'd been thinking about that for a while and wanted to see what is it like to not have a mask or to have it less often. And that led me down the path of, okay, what things do I do naturally that feel good to me? Right. If I'm not in a corporate environment and having to be in meeting after meeting, if I'm not in a situation where I already have the expectations of like dozens of people on me, and I have a very strict thing that I need to follow in order to get that promotion in 6 months and 12 months, etc. If I let all of that go and start from just the basics of who am I and how do I want to express that in the world, um, that that really pushed me even further. So there's that sense of being wanting to be a little bit more of entrepreneurial with my time, but it was like a self-discovery thing as well of can I can I trust myself? Can I lean into wanting to just be myself and then see how that works in the world? So yeah, I think part of it is, leaving that corporate culture, but there also is kind of a self-discovery aspect to that.
I see. Would you be able to name one of two things that were particularly hard for you, or maybe vice versa, like uh, to phrase it in the opposite way, that felt particularly liberating once you didn't have to do them anymore?
Um, I mean, I think one obvious one is that, like, if you feel that you have um, a good set of instincts for how a project should be designed, there's always going to be a lot of trying to convince other people in a corporate space that these are good ideas. That's totally normal and it's good. Um, but you have to watch out for if there are any times where you feel like, okay, if I had the freedom to design this, like, is this something where that freedom, let me say it maybe a slightly different way. The wins and the losses don't line up in a corporate environment to your wins and losses. Like, if you succeed, doesn't mean you'll succeed. If you fail, it doesn't mean that you'll fail, because the corporate environment is a system in which it reacts rather than you as the individual feel the success and failure.
Yeah.
Which might mean you're on a team that doesn't do well, but the team is rewarded ultimately. Or you're on a team that does well, and you as an individual may not be rewarded in the same way other individuals
Right.
are. So having to having to feel out when is it like a direct reward for success and a learning from failure versus like the whole other system that's shifting and moving around you can be really confusing.
Yeah.
um, and I definitely had experienced that in multiple times, like in my career, where I was like, I don't understand how to succeed in this environment. I'm trying things, it's not working. Like, what do I do?
Hmm.
And that's not to say that I wasn't successful. I think if you look at TypeScript, TypeScript was clearly successful. Rust was successful, but um, I think that there's definitely a desire to simplify and
Yeah.
to get to being able to take on the success or failure largely on myself, and then trust that I can then take that, learn from it, and then, go into the next day having learned from that.
Hmm. So I guess in a nutshell, like understandably, you don't like the idea of being a cell uh, in a giant organism. right? Because that's what you end up being.
Right.
Like, and the life of the single cell is nothing compared to the life of the organism itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And as Andrew points out, it's kind of like there are times when you almost have to pretend to work or it's weird. It's hard to describe.
Is there anything?
It
Sorry.
oh, I was just gonna say it's like a yeah. It's unless you have experienced it, it's really hard to describe that the actual work and then the fake work overlaps. It's like the tweet you were talking about before. There's kind of this lie that's the necessary
Yeah.
lie that's going on at the same time as the actual work, and you have to maintain both. Whereas it's so much better if you can just do the work, present everything transparently, and say, "Okay, this is what we did. This is the direction we want to go,"
Yeah.
and get feedback directly from the users of the thing that you're working on.
Yeah. My impression of this is also that the more the system is inefficient at allowing information to percolate, like to run through the system, the more optics become important and the more you have to play this game. And like for me, even in an infinitely smaller company, which was Redis Labs compared to what Microsoft is, that already for me was way more than what I was willing to take. So yeah, I can
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
Is there anything specific about your autism condition that you feel you have been liberated from? Like, maybe small things. I don't know, stuff
Mm,
about meetings, stuff like this. Like, do you have one or two things?
I would say, well, so there's a lot. I mean, just one part of it about being open with people so that I can be comfortable to be a little bit more myself and not feel like I have to act a particular way. And lean on people to give me a little bit of leeway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things that how I want to act and how I want to talk about stuff is going to be different. Um, I would say the other thing too is related to that leaving the corporate environment, which was to give myself the space to be creative. Um, like I could feel that tension, wanting to be creative, wanting to be able to pick up and then take the day and then break it into what makes sense for me. Um, from a kind of a in an autistic sense, there's this kind of a hyper focus that happens. Other parts of the spectrum experience this as well, but being able to have an idea or a topic, like to us, it's like to someone that's more neurotypical, it's like, oh, cool, I read about jaguars for 30 minutes. That was a lot of fun, or whatever. Maybe they don't even do that. Um, but to someone on the spectrum, it might be like, hey, I started reading about jaguars and I now know everything about big cats, and it's like 3 weeks later, right? There's a the scale of interest and how far and how long we can drill into an idea um, is is quite different, and giving yourself time and space to be able to do that is like an autistic way of living our healthiest lives. So when you don't have that space and you have to kind of pretend to enjoy topics that you don't enjoy, um, is actually quite taxing mentally. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I think that there's, and that's not to say that there isn't responsibilities that you have in life, and you need to, clearly you need to pay your taxes, you need to follow all the responsibilities in your life. But the more that I was noticing that the more that I gave myself space to follow those interests, like over a long holiday or on a vacation, like when we started Nushell, I went on a 2 week long vacation and spent at least half of it solid just working on Nushell, because to me that was the most satisfying way to vacation. Even
Mm-hmm.
though I was in a mobile home traveling the country, I was like, I would just prefer to work on this project. And to me, that was when I was the happiest.
Okay, I see. Uh, so to say one thing in defense of big companies, so just for the sake of it, uh,
Yeah.
um, how much of this do you think was because of the path that you chose? Because I can imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, so feel free to correct me, but I would assume that like I'm assuming that a principal engineer has a more, I don't know, high level job than a senior engineer. I would assume that a senior engineer is allowed more easily to have like 3 days straight where they don't have meetings. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. As someone that as you become more senior, you're responsible for taking on more of the overall vision of the team. So you're meeting with people. It's not actually I don't dislike meetings. I don't want to give that impression either because I actually do like communicating with people and I do like connecting with people and seeing how ideas can fit together and how we can solve problems. To me, that's a lot of fun. But the there's kind of a tax on top of that. There's the, you know, the corporate culture tax on that where it's like, okay, a lot of the what's going on is stuff that I have to do as part of paying into this particular corporate culture. And it's not specific to any one company. I feel like every corporation especially has the, the Google way, the Microsoft way, the IBM way, whatever it is, where
Mm-hmm.
you have to be doing X amount of work in this extra thing. And but yeah, I would say that there's still ways to get freedom. There's still pockets of freedom inside of the corporation. And of course, people, the more you enjoy your job in that particular space, the more you're going to thrive in that particular space. So that's natural. So a good manager will help you find the place that's best for you in that part in your career. So you can kind of, you know, d- spend more of your day doing things that you want to do and then naturally be more
Mm-hmm.
productive.
Okay, I have one last question about Microsoft, and it's a more lighthearted question, and I think then we can maybe switch to other stuff. On a scale from 1 to 10, so let me give a tiny little bit of context. I have never worked at Microsoft, but I did work for a while for a Microsoft Gold Partner company. Um, it was a traumatic experience in some ways. One way in which it was traumatic was because we had to use Microsoft stuff. So I'm talking about the main thing I have problems with a lot of things, but the main thing I have problem with is Microsoft Teams. So from a scale from 1 to 10, I'm assuming that you also had to use Teams yourself being at
Yeah.
Microsoft. On a scale from 1 to 10, how much did having to use Teams impacted your choice of leaving Microsoft? And I'm not just Teams, but Teams plus all the problems that it
Right.
brings. It used to
Right.
not being able to, it used to not even light up your icon or something when you were speaking, so that people, when I was using it, people would keep always asking, can you hear me, can you hear me, which is
Right.
annoying, but they didn't have any visual feedback. And also people having horrible meeting etiquette where they don't know how to stop their microphone properly. They use speakers, they type while you're talking. On a scale from 1 to 10, how much?
Oh, that's funny. Um, okay, I'll at least give a little bit of background there. So when I first started, um, my second tour at Microsoft, I guess you could say, my second
Yeah.
time at Microsoft, um, I was remote, but most of the team was not. So
Oh
I
God.
I went and they did like an all team meeting. There was like 60 people or something at this thing, and so I flew into Seattle and I went to this meeting. And I said to the director, I said, "Hey, there's only a couple of us that are remote. Can I give a session and talk about what it's like to be a remote employee?" He's like, "Sure, sure." So I give the session. I tell people how awkward it is when people talk over each other and the technology we use is not super great and et cetera, and how to be a little bit better, how to have better habits around this. And they're like, "That's cool. That's cool." Now, granted, this was at the end of 2019, and anyone listening knows exactly what happens next. So we all went remote, in like 6 months. There was no next meeting of flying everyone into Seattle. So we all had to figure out how to use this technology. And I think actually Microsoft Teams improved greatly, which is kind of an unfortunate result of the it's positive, but unfortunate that it had to cause had a pandemic as the cause, because now that everyone was on it all the time, it was really easy where teams needed to improve and how best to do that. So yeah, I think by the end, it was definitely better. Yeah.
It was.
I don't know
Okay.
1 to 10.
Okay. It's fine. It's fine. You don't have to answer. I'll default to 7.
Uh, I mean,
Um,
it's like all these systems are like kind of meh, right? Even Discord has its problems. Like all of these are like, meh.
yeah, I agree. But what really struck me hard and made me super disappointed of this is that I remember clearly when I was a teenager, and me and my other teenager friends had better etiquette when staying in Discord, Ventrilo, like the communication, voice communication tools of the time. And
Right.
we were just coordinating to play video games, and we were more effective than people doing it for a living.
Right.
In my job, it was so bad. Um, like the Microsoft partner company. Oh, people are saying mumble TeamSpeak. No. Well, anyway, Mumble, Ventrilo, and TeamSpeak were the ones at the hot ones at the time. I think Xfire also had voice, but anyway, let's leave aside this discussion. Um, like I think that like the inability of communicating in meetings was so bad at my last job that I genuinely believe that some projects went downhill, not entirely because of not being able to understand each other and being super ineffective with meetings, but I think that maybe it was one of the major factors, and it could have been enough to not just have that. Like the moment when it was clear the most to me was when I was in Singapore and we had to do these meetings Singapore, Italy. Some between devs went well, but whenever you had to bring in somebody non-technical, it was a disaster.
Mm.
And the peak and the overall peak for me, like at the end was at Redis Labs when we were trying to. So this is all how can I say in-house in Nation. Well, we for the pandemic. We had to talk with companies related to the Italian government because they were using Redis to run the nationwide contact tracing app. And I jumped in some of these meetings, and people really they could not do any, they could not make their microphone work, they could not hear, they could not, they had like connections that would drop, I don't know, 70% of the packets or something like this. It was a disaster, a complete
Mm.
disaster. Have you ever experienced something this bad at Microsoft?
No, I never
No.
have.
Oh,
No,
that's
I
good to
mean,
hear.
for so a company like Mozilla, it was interesting because most of it's distributed. So a lot of the people are used to treating, things like chat and video, like jumping into a video call one on one with someone as just like bumping into them in the hallway. So it was very natural to be chatting with people constantly, but in the same way that you would do on a Discord. So I think that, yeah, for teams that are used to it, for teams that have worked around some of the technical issues, I feel like I'm so used to, kind of navigating, coordinating with other people that
Mm-hmm.
way, that it would almost be weird to go back into an office and sit down across from someone and be like, okay, they can just stare at me whenever. That's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, I see. I see your point there. Okay, so that was nice. Let me think about what to talk about next. So I am obviously curious about your Rust history more than anything else. And um, I don't know if there's anything that you want to say to open up this arc. Feel free. Otherwise, I can just ask more precise questions.
Sure. Um, I can share a quick story about how I made mistakes.
Okay.
That's the first thing that came to mind. So like I was saying, I was working at Microsoft and I worked on TypeScript for, 3.5 years. And I was like the program manager, which it's impossible to describe this job, but it's if you think of engineering as the actual writing of the code, something is everything else. And that is basically program management. So everything from coordinating with the users to creating partnerships with other teams to running meetings to so I ran the design team for TypeScript and that kind of thing. This put a lot of experience in my pocket, sure, for one thing. And as I left, it also kind of put a chip on my shoulder to kind of say, hey, I had this like, amazing success. Um, out of the gate, like coming into the next team, which was working at Mozilla, working on Rust. I was kind of like, hey, I'm a total badass. You should all like listen to me and do what I say. Um, and that is, well, not only was that abrasive and arrogant, but it, completely ineffective. And so it was kind of you know, an interesting experience to step into it and go, holy moly, having this sense of I made one thing successful so I can walk into the next thing and clearly all the same things are going to make that successful and then falling on my face like immediately was like a really good experience. So I came into Mozilla and once I kind of fell on my face and once the kind of the Rust leadership folks kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey, this is a coordinated effort. Like, you can't just come in and have all the answers. There's no way you have all the answers." And, I was like, "Hey, you're right. You're right. I don't." So, I think that in order for them to lean on me and whatnot, I had to kind of break down to the point where I could be a useful tool for the team. So that was something where, yeah, I came in to Mozilla, started working on Rust, and had these experiences, like a personal, interpersonal experiences that actually made me a much better person to share my knowledge with the team. At the same time, I'm like working in systems programming for the first time in like many years. So I worked on a language called Chapel in grad school, which is it's a really cool language, and no one ever talks about it. I feel like in every interview I mention it at least once because I feel like if you're a programming language nerd like myself, you should check it out. Just one of those that you should just have on the radar. Um, but yeah, I was doing systems programming for that, but then TypeScript is all JavaScript. I hadn't touched any systems languages at all, and so I was really having to get my chops and like actually write code and write real systems level code. And working on Rust is a whole experience for those I'm sure who've experienced it. This whole idea of the borrow checker and working the borrow checker and trying to get, you've got X amount to do that day. And part of it is, okay, I have to get, learn enough Rust that I can deliver this. So that was also quite a steep learning curve in terms of I started my first project was in the compiler. So actually making changes in the compiler while I was still leveling up my Rust was an experience. I definitely feel indebted to Nico Matsakis, who was the leader of the compiler team, who was very patient with me and like sat me down and talked me through um, some of the way that the compiler works and was very patient with my why does it have to work this way? Why does it have to work that way? As I was just like letting go of my my view of the world at the time. Um, and it was interesting because as a result, I was able to design like the Rust error messages, which little did I know, I kind of wrote this blog post as we designed this thing and we had some initial error messages. And I wrote the blog post and I called it The Shape of Errors to Come, which is a reference to The Shape of Jazz to Come, which is this Ornette Coleman album. And at the time, people thought that was a really audacious title. I mean, the jazz record as well. People thought that that was like, how could you call it that? And lo and behold, Ornette was correct. That was the shape of jazz to come. Was this more freeform jazz? And I wrote The Shape of Errors to Come as kind of a cheeky, oh yeah, this is what people are going to do with error messages. And lo and behold, that is the way that error messages are done today. In a lot of projects, they've kind of picked up that design, which is like pretty amazing to see the reverberations of something that you did, 10 years later. I pulled up PowerShell a couple of months ago and it has the same kind of error messages now. And I was like, wow, that is wild. Um, so yeah, I worked on the error messages and I was trying to think, is there anything in the Rust side? Oh yeah, I worked on the language server as well. So the Rust language server, which is now replaced by Rust Analyzer, but it was kind of like our initial thing. But the reason that I worked on the Rust Analyzer is that, you know, as as a team at the time, so this is 2015, as the Rust team, I was talking to them about like how can we actually go the right direction? I think one of the struggles when you're designing a language is that if you're not careful, you go in your personal direction, but that doesn't mean you're going in the right direction, right? You're designing something for yourself, but that may not be the right way.
Hmm.
Um, that's not to say you shouldn't include yourself as a vote in the right way to go, especially if you're the architect or the lead designer. But when you when you're kind of making this transition, and I was mentioning earlier, making a transition to being more of an industrial strength language, you need to go talk to industry. Like you need to go talk to companies, you need to go hear from the users. So what we did back in 2015 is we did two surveys. One was a community survey where we just put together like a 15, 20-minute long survey, put it out, hoping to get, a few hundred people responding, ended up getting a few thousand people responding. So it's like tons of good data. And then we also set up cold calls to companies that were interested in Rust and were interested in talking to us. So some of those had adopted Rust and some of them had not adopted Rust. They were just kind of, somewhat interested. We had a contact over there and we just kind of reached out and said, hey, can we call you up and talk about Rust for an hour? And those two surveys allowed us to actually hear what like when you're in the project, you see the project from the eyes of the project, but what you really wanna do is jump outside of the project and see it from the eyes of everyone else looking at the project. Say, "Oh, I would use this except for blah. What are the reasons that, you don't use Zig?" "We were curious, what are the reasons you don't use Rust?" And then you can tabulate that and go, "Holy moly, so the people that aren't using Rust, at least a quarter of them are not using it because there's no good IDE support." "Really?" Like, everyone that was working on this project were all systems level engineers. They probably all were comfortable in Emacs. They didn't care, you know? There was no experience from the user's perspective, like the potential developer's perspective to say, I need to be in Visual Studio. I need to be in an IDE that feels really good to me because that is where I feel that's where my ergonomics are. That's where I feel the most comfortable. And yeah, so we started on the Rust language server to help solve that, deficiency that came out because we did that survey. And so that survey is kind of like continued year after year after this point to kind of say like what are the deficiencies in terms of where can Rust grow next? And I think that's helped them build success on top of success in terms of, you know, removing the barriers to entry for people to get into Rust.
Hmm. When you mentioned these call calls, when would that be, roughly speaking, in terms of years?
I think that was also in 2015. If I remember correctly, it's like 2015 slash 2016, somewhere in that time frame. Uh, I don't know how often that's done these days. I was part of the community team, and then after doing that for a little while, I did end up leaving. So I don't do any formal. volunteering in the Rust project proper. I'm more on the outside,
Hmm.
doing training and that kind of stuff. But yeah, at the time, it was assumed that these things were going to run roughly once a year.
Okay.
We could have check-ins with people at the conferences as well. So, if companies wanted to come and talk at the conference, that's a good face-to-face time that they could use as well.
Were you running trainings like by yourself or like as a Mozilla employee or what?
I didn't. I picked that up later, so that was more of a recent thing to say,
Oh,
what kind of content do I want to create? And I feel like I
okay.
had, now 6 years of Rust experience, and my particular approach is to try to say things in a way that I think is generally understandable. Like I would much prefer to speak simply rather than using a bunch of technical terms. And I think that, well, at the time I was like, okay, maybe that would be a good combination. I can
Hmm.
explain Rust in this more folksy, relaxed way.
Yeah. Okay, so calls like somehow interacting with the industry. That makes total sense. Is there any other like non-obvious from an outsider perspective big win that you think the Rust team had from a non-programming perspective?
Hmm. So I'll say this, but I feel like it's the way to actually see how successful this is to watch over the next 15 years. So,
Mhm.
sometimes when we're talking about a system, these systems move on their own timescale, and you don't actually see
Yeah.
how successful something is until much later. But one of the things that we talked about inside of Mozilla was that Rust was helping to define what it would be like to have um, a healthy open source in a modern sense. And that sounds a bit, maybe that sounds a bit painted too broadly. Let me try to explain what I mean.
Sure.
When Mozilla was working on Firefox, there was a separation between Mozilla, the company, and the contributors from the company and the outside world. Um, Dave Herman, who I worked with at Mozilla and still good friends with, calls that two OSS, like two party OSS, um, being open source software.
Would you say
So
this is
this,
similar to what Go is?
yeah, that's another two OSS.
Okay.
So when you have Google being like the entity and the community being a separate entity, and the primary entity having some like higher standing in terms of the success and failure of a project, or the ownership of the project, or who has the stakeholders. There's like different ways that you can slice it where you
Hmm.
see how that tension happens in different ways. But yeah, to OSS. And Dave, in particular, really wanted to push one OSS, meaning singular entity ownership and control. Not control, that sounds like a bad word, but like someone who's responsible for the direction of a project that is a single entity. So even if a company sponsors it, they are just a seat at a table of a much larger table. Like um, there's no ownership of the singular thing.
Yeah.
And so his hope was that would give Russ longevity. And he fought extremely hard. And I think I can say that publicly. He fought extremely hard to keep Rust in a one OSS capable formation. So it was never wedded tightly to the way that Mozilla worked, the philosophy inside of Mozilla, and instead was always step by step moving towards one OSS. Um, when Rust created the core team and the sub teams, the intention was that any company could pay someone to staff these core teams and sub teams. Um, but it would be these would be kind of design bodies or voting bodies or community bodies. Like they're not, you don't pay to get a seat and you don't pay to get a vote. right? You're just a contributing volunteer among other volunteers on these teams, and that was really important. Um, at the time, it very much caused some friction because, you know, hey, I'm paying for everyone that works on this project, so why don't I get to have complete control? Is a natural thing. It's a natural thing to ask. Like, why not? But, Dave was very strict to say, like, "No, this is a independent entity, and it should act like an independent entity." And that worked for Rust. It did not work for Servo. Servo was not allowed to become independent like that in the same way. I think I can say that publicly. I now have, so it's done now. Um, and that makes a big difference. So we had hoped that we could do the same thing with Servo and to create an independent entity, and weren't able to do that. But with Rust, we were. And I then coordinated after Dave moved on to another company. I worked with the director to coordinate um, keep funding the Rust project. And then over time, it was going to tail off. Like we knew there was just going to, over time, people would move on to other companies and that would be fine. Um, but it would last as long as it needed to, and it would transition at some point. Now, of course, I didn't know what was going to happen. I don't want to imply that I had any knowledge about any changes that Mozilla was going to do structurally that impacted negatively a lot of people. And I don't want to say anything about that in particular. Um, what I mean more was the preparation. We knew years ago that Rust would eventually largely become a foundation. Like there would, at some point in the future, it would support itself by having a conglomerate of people, of companies that would work together. Like we just kind of knew that that was the direction it was going to take. We didn't know what that was going to look like or how it was going to work. But again, it was mostly based on this idea of this one OSS. Like so, some entity um, here that would be like the core team if you want to help direct Rust. It's you're all working together on the core team. So the foundation itself isn't even a controlling entity for Rust. Like it doesn't tell Rust what to do because that would also be a 2OSS solution, right? So the um the owners and the way that it works together is in one place. And it's a bit nuanced, it's a bit textured, but maybe that's a good general idea.
Thank you. Okay, that makes a lot of sense from my perspective. I think I understand what you're saying. So that's awesome. Honestly, I wrote that in a blog post, but honestly, I was genuinely very happy when the Rust Foundation happened. I won't ask you to comment, but as an outsider, I have the impression that Mozilla is very unreliable. And aside from the layoffs that happened, also generally, I have I don't know. I don't understand how certain things are going and why Firefox has certain problems that haven't been fixed in years, which I still have hold grudges against these problems, while the CEO is talking about new products and VPN stuff. So it's like not VPN, but Mozilla. Anyway, so that was awesome. But so here's another question, and let me actually preface this so that it's not clear that I'm not like trying to trap you into saying something that you don't want to say. The preface is, when I was working on the Ziglang website, I did an overview of all the websites that other programming languages have to steal good ideas. And like some people were complaining on the internet that some ideas, like the Zig website, seem to copy some other ideas. Yes, it totally does. I saw something nice. It's mine now. Thank you. And of course, I took a look at the Rust website, and as usual, I'm super ignorant of all this stuff. I didn't know anything about the Rust website redesign, and somebody in chat, I wasn't live on Twitch, and somebody in chat told me about the old website, the new website, and how some people, most developers, I don't know, well, a good chunk of people don't like the new redesign. And so I don't know, I clicked around a few links, saw discussions on Reddit and stuff, and I saw that there was a lot of drama around the time when the website was released in 2018. So I after reading about this stuff, I made my own mind, and if you will, so going back to the original point, I'm an outsider. I can only see the outside lies. I don't know what the internal reality is. But at the same time, while I obviously knowing this, I won't be 100% convinced of what my perception is as an outsider. But at the same time, I do have to come up with an opinion. And as an outsider, my opinion was that I was very confused at what happened because, long story short for the viewers, when the Rust website was redesigned in 2018, that was in concomitance with the new Rust edition, and the website was rushed. The contributors working on the website were burnt out by it. They weren't happy. The community wasn't happy either because they felt left out. And also the website redesign was, let's just say, confusing to people because it was a redesign clearly geared towards decision makers in companies, and it wasn't anymore a website purely for developers. As an example, actually, you know what? I have this thing. Let me bring it up. Boom, website, nice. So this was the old design, and you can see it's very minimalistic. Features, code sample, documentation, install, community, contribute, install button, new website. Leave aside for a moment whether you like or not the graphical style, but like just talking from a semantic perspective of the structure. Now there's learn, there's no more documentation, there's a lot more stuff. There's a get started, not just install. There's a bunch of points. There's also testimonials, and developers don't like testimonials. And I won't go into detail. I made a hour-long video on YouTube. You can find it in the Zig SHOWTIME web YouTube channel if you want to torture yourself with my ramblings. But the idea was that people were very angry also because the website was released. It was rushed, and so there wasn't enough time for the community to comment on it and to iterate over the comments 1, 2, 3 times, whatever it's necessary. And while I was looking at this, I was asking myself, like, how can you do this? How can you do this to yourself? If you're a fully independent organization, why? Why is somebody in the Rust organization forcing this deadline on people this way? And oh man, I don't have the tweet. Actually, you know what? It's so nice that I need to bring this up. Because Andrew made a similar tweet the other day. I have to bring it up. Sorry, give me a second. It's too funny, because I think it's really on point. Let me see. Because it seemed to me super weird that the people would do this to themselves in a project that wasn't fully corporate. And man, I give me just a second. Sorry, I know this is annoying, but the tweet is so good that I have to do it. Actually, you know what? I'll go on my own profile and I'll grab it from there because I retweeted it. Where is it? Actually, let me bring up the view. Yeah, there we go. So this was Andrew complaining about the latest LLVM release that was released without closing all the blocking bugs. But anyway, this is another issue. But yeah, I think this is so real. Like, why is the deadline more important than other realer stuff? In which, in the case of the Rust website, I guess wasn't bugs, but like, yeah, the deadline is fake. So I was really confused by this, and I ended up assuming that there must have been influence or somehow from the Rust, from the Mozilla organization that forced this on people in the Rust project. Otherwise, why would they do this to themselves? So my question for you is, at the end of the day, how would the Mozilla company evaluate people that worked on the Rust project? They had to, right? You or people working there, they had to have a manager in Mozilla
Right.
evaluating them, and that has to have an impact on not the overall direction of the project, but like on some minor things on the day to day, or how people do things. What can you say on this?
Um, my experience with Mozilla wasn't all that different from other kind of corporate cultures in that sense. So, as a junior engineer, you're just going to work on the project that you're working on. As a senior engineer, you're still largely working on that project. But the higher you go, the more you're expected to spread out your influence, like be able to influence more than one project to make it successful. And I don't know if this relates to your website. It really doesn't. We can maybe talk a little bit about that, but
Mm-hmm.
um, this idea of checking additional sets of boxes so that you're performing at a particular level is part of that tension we were talking about with corporate cultures. I think where if you're maybe your passion is working on this one project, but if you're not going out and helping the other research projects succeed, um, then you don't check that box, right? And then when it comes time for reviews, it's like, well, you don't have that box checked, and that would be really good for you to have checked that box. And that's not to say that there isn't a good intent there. As a more senior engineer, you should be going and helping other projects. Like that's a lot of experience that's just sitting around not being spread to these other teams. Um, or if you have particular expertise in a particular style of coding and they can benefit, then spending time with them to make sure that they can learn from that or use you in some way is really beneficial. So there's good intent, but yeah, I would say the Mozilla culture in that sense is very similar to other corporations. They do expect you to um, it's not necessarily go out and promote Mozilla as a brand or anything like that per se. But you do have this. It is important that you're contributing to the the company's success. So for Mozilla, that was, are you is Rust in a sense enough? Well, excuse me, is Rust in a sense enough? Um, Well, maybe not. As you get more senior, maybe you should be contributing some of that knowledge to Firefox itself, as one example.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah. About the website itself, do you have any extra comment there?
Um, I would say that if we put ourselves back in 2018, and a lot of people have talked about bits and pieces of this public. I'm not saying anything I think that's out of turn, but it was extremely stressful time for all teams involved. It wasn't just the website. So that was the first time where the project shifted into a gear that was, we're going to do a big release. And there was a lot of pressure on people to make sure that the Rust 2018 was a success. So the design of the language, the polish of the documentation around it, the website was part of this marketing effort. There was a couple of pieces that were going along with that. Like you mentioned, the shift in tone of the website. Some people were not a fan of the shift in tone, where it's clearly not just for developers anymore. It is for a larger audience, a more broad audience. Um, I will go on the record to say this is a good shift. Now it may have over pivoted, may have shifted too far, but developers themselves are not enough.
I agree. By the way, sorry,
So
just a small interruption.
yeah,
That's the same point that I made in the video and also in the live streams. I think that this is a great change, and people. My argument here with the website and the drama was that that was a good change people in the community need to understand that the website is a marketing tool first and foremost. It's for people that you don't already have more than people that you already have. And in my
Yep.
opinion, if anything, the failure, like, and in my opinion, the Rust website was executed very, and I say that also in the video, by the way, if people want, again, 45 minutes of just talking about this, it's on YouTube. I think they did a great job. I don't have comments on the styling. Some people have run on the styling. I don't know. I'm colorblind. I don't care. But like, structurally speaking, I think it's amazing because it plugs into all the extra content, like the books and everything else. It's very clear, allows people to jump into whatever they care about very quickly. If anything, my point of like my critique of what the Rust team did was that it seemed to me that they didn't want to say this openly to the community, because I read also the what's it called, the blog post that was supposed to, the retrospective blog post that came out 2 years later, and it seemed to me that that blog post didn't say this. It should have, in my opinion, should have stated this. This website is so not only for you. Chill out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. One of the ethos in the Rust community is kind of summed up as why wasn't I consulted? I can't remember who wrote this blog post. Maybe someone can pull it up and link to it. But this idea of we as a community, especially in open source, we as a community in open source need to feel like our voices are heard and that decisions are aired between
Mm-hmm.
us in a community as they are made. So we can have a chance to actually speak into this decision and feel like our feedback is part of what makes that decision. If that doesn't happen, it feels like that when we were saying 2OSS, like this idea of like a separate entity controlling the project, you
Okay,
feel
it's
separated, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like you have the ownership that you want to have.
Is that it?
And it's well, so this is the talk about it. There was a original blog
Oh,
post
okay.
much earlier that
Okay.
uh, yeah, I can't remember what the name of the top of the blog post was, but this why wasn't I consulted way of thinking is how Rust generally is supposed to work. That's why
Okay.
Rust has the RFC process, and the RFC process isn't just for technical decisions. It is a much broader thing.
Mm-hmm.
So every year when Rust plans the next year, you ask the community, okay, where do you want Rust to go in the next year? They collect all that data, they read everyone's blog post and collect it together. And that helps inform the blueprints for what is laid out over the next year. So this is ongoing, and I think maybe some of the tension around the website was like they knew that there was going to have to be a tonal shift, right? When you're talking to corporations, corporations need to trust you as a project. And in order for that to happen, you need a much broader set of people looking at this technology and having confidence in it. And that takes time. And that also takes education. And it takes a different kind of education than, hey, check out my Rust sample. It can do like 15 languages, which is awesome. You have Unicode support, but that's not going to necessarily check the boxes for a CTO that needs to know that Rust is going to be a good bet, for the next
Yeah.
5 years for their project.
Makes sense.
So yeah, I would say that there was definitely a little bit of the why wasn't I consulted friction of like why, had we done it over again, maybe we would have flighted both the plan and, beta versions of the website in a way that more people had access. I think there was actually flights of beta versions, but that whole time period, again, it was extremely stressful. It's really hard to look at it in such a way that you can have hindsight as 2020 very easily with
Yeah.
2018. I feel like because tons of pieces and tons of people learning on the fly, like making mistakes and trying to adjust, trying to aim towards a much larger release, a much larger set of things that they wanted to do than they'd ever done before. And I feel like that's asking a lot of organizational structure that may not have been in place.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like as a team, they learned from that. So 2021 isn't expected to be very big by comparison to 2018, and the ambitions were not as big because they look back and said, "Wow, a lot of people took on a lot of emotional strain, a lot of emotional burden in 2018 to make Rust successful, and we lost some of them. Like they just left the project." and that is not a sustainable way to do these kinds of releases. So I think
Yeah.
naturally calibrating, if you think of Rust as a system, right? The core team, the sub teams, and the community around it, and everything. Asking the system to do what is sustainable for the system. Like you're part of it, right? You can make a vote, but learning from the mistakes of doing too much or having stretched yourself too thin and then paying the penalty for that. So I think the website, it might be, people want to point at that. I don't think this is necessarily fair to point at that one specific thing per se and drill in too far, because I feel like it was just one piece of us, a lot of people being put under a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Okay. I apologize for wanting to drill on this down so much. So stop
No, it's
me
fine.
if you don't want to talk about this, but also for the viewers, before people start thinking that I just want to hate on Rust. My point of view on this is that it really confused me, because my experience in the Zig organization, which obviously is different, it's minuscule compared to Rust. So obviously it's not a one-to-one, but that's what I know. And so that's where I come from. And seeing this really confused me. And I do really look at Rust as the older cousin that is a bit forward in life than you are, and you kind of look at what happened to them because you know that's going to happen to you. So this really confused me. And here's okay. So one thing, I agree. The website, actually, in my opinion, the website as an end product it's a great success, and I completely disagree with everybody that complains about it, which is also an argument that I made in the video and also while streaming. But and also setting aside the retrospective thing. Although I'll make one comment on the retrospective thing. I think that the retrospective, in one way, at least based on the answer that you gave, it seems to me that this was one moment where you can see the tension between the necessary lies and the internal workings, and honesty versus things that actually function, and why wasn't I consulted versus you should not be consulted on this. That has to happen, period. And
I think that's kind of true. But yeah,
mhm.
go ahead. Finish your question.
No, please, if you want to comment this, feel free.
I mean, I feel like that. Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be an internal structure, a core team, a team behind the closed door that needs to make decisions, right? It's not just about leadership in the project. If you think of the moderators, right? So these people that work behind the scenes to ensure that there's not a lot of toxic behavior in a community, in the kind of the communication channels that are specific to that project. They're doing a lot of work, and it's supposed to be private. It's supposed to be secret, because to spill it out makes it worse, right? It kind of doesn't let it do its job. And that's true too for more of the like a core design. There's a lot of, if you put all of it public, there's a lot of personal stuff that would spill out. There's a lot of decisions that are being made and then retracted before they actually become public, because you know it's a problem even before it's ever publicly talked about. So there'll be times when, you want to have that conversation where you shut the door, make your mistake behind the closed door, open the door, having made the mistake, and then share that publicly. Um, so yeah, there definitely is reasons to do it that way that are not necessarily nefarious, that are not necessarily like lies. Um, they are just part of how to do it in a healthy way,
Mhm.
rather than do it in such a way that,
Yeah.
you know, if you're completely transparent all the time, the system would work less well than if you actually hid some of it.
Okay, but in a I don't know, maybe you can tell me if you think I'm too naive about this, but I feel like it's not just a dichotomy like this. There's also a third option, which maybe not everybody can play. It's not a card that you can play all the time, but um, when I said earlier, like the lie versus how the thing has to actually work, would it really be? I feel like the problem is that the lie in this case is that everybody has to be consulted every time, and
For
that's
every
that
decision.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's a 100% thing. and it's presented as an absolute truth. And so, for example, in my case, and again, it's much easier for me because it's an organization with like a handful of people. While I was working on the website and coming up with my reasonings, I said on stream to everybody that the day the Zig project grows enough that we have to talk with CTOs, if I'm still here, I will change the website, and it's not going to be for you just anymore. It's going to be also for other people. And I'm telling you up front, this is going to happen if it's going to be my decision. And the reasoning is also, well, I mean, yes, you're losing a website. Like, it's not as comfortable for you as it was before. It's a website. Who cares? Do you prefer to have a website or you prefer to have a Zig job?
Right.
I think the answer is obvious.
There's that, and there's also, and this isn't prescriptive. This isn't you telling people, necessarily um, that they have to believe something, but the way like we work as humans, we don't always get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
can only understand stuff sometimes a year later, 3 years later, we look back and say, "Oh, this is fine. This is fine." Like syntax changes, since we're talking about a programming language
Yeah.
on this particular show. This happens all the time with programming language features. So Rust implemented async await in a particular way where the await keywords on the right hand side, and people are like, well, this is a terrible idea. There was dozens of decisions like that where even though they had time to be consulted, they still hated it when it was released.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, this is going to cause Rust to
Yeah.
fail. This is stupid. And of course they're wrong. but the thing is, they would even say that they are wrong a month later after having played with it.
Mm-hmm.
They come back and say, "This is great. I was never mad about this." It's like, "Wait, what conversation were you and I in a month ago?" Right? People are going to change, their opinions are going to change. And the website, once you're used to like this is the Rust website, there's no like friction, I would say. And some people may still not like it, and that's totally fine. But the audience is kind of broadened as a result. And I think if you look at, and not to say that it's necessarily the website itself in total, but all of the efforts going around making Rust um, interesting to a broader audience, interesting to corporations, interesting to companies to adopt it, has succeeded. I mean, in 2021, we're just seeing like a whole laundry list of companies adopting Rust that are big name software companies.
Yeah.
And part of that, I think, was all the efforts going into the foundation, the website, the way that Rust talks about
Sure.
itself outside of, the kind of
Yeah.
core Rust fans and that kind of thing.
I agree. There's also I guess, the point where people from the outside see these things happen and they say, well, obviously it's going to be like this. Like, to them, things seems to, like, success seems so obvious for certain things where it never was. People
It
had
never
to actually
was.
fight for
It was,
it.
yeah, it was an extreme amount of work over a long period of time to make it that. Um, yeah, and it's easy. We were talking about like the backstage, this idea of people are working fervently behind the scenes, like the amount of work that say Ashley put on to making the um, the Rust Foundation succeed is like astronomical.
Yeah.
And other people that were working on that, and you're not going to see that sweat, you know, unless you talk to these people and say, "Well, how was that?" It's like, "Wow, it was a lot of work."
Yeah.
Um, and there's just that kind of going on behind the scenes, and I think part of it too is and I'm not going to like overstate this, but I think we as people using a product need to just trust a little bit and just recognize the sweat on the brow of people working on these projects. Like they're working on it to in order for them to succeed.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, but let me continue with my crusade on hating on Rust, so that people that are
Okay.
gonna watch this can
Do-
have more fodder to what.
Yeah, I was wondering. There's been tons of questions like fly by. I hope someone's like collecting
No,
questions so we
it's
can
fine. You
answer
know
some of
what?
these too.
We can at the end. Usually we have a Q&A with people.
Oh, cool, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's do that.
yeah. Everybody, please repeat them at the end. I'll tell you when the time comes. So, um, So, last question about the specific stuff of the website. Just to nail down one point that I'm curious about. Um, Given what I do in the Zig Software Foundation, I can clearly see the importance from a marketing perspective of coordinating the launch of the website with the edition. I said this in the video in live stream. It doesn't matter if the website is going to be perfect 1 week after the release. Nobody's going to care. Like, you can only get one spike in your job to do a successful release. Like, we mentioned success in, like, without defining it precisely, but one obvious way of defining, like one safe way of defining it from a marketing product launch perspective is you want the spike to be as big as possible, because you're not going to get continued interest. Like, you can only stay on the front page of Hacker News for so long. So you want to concentrate everything at once. So you want the website and the launch of the thing to come up at the same time. So I could see, you can correct me if I'm wrong because I don't know the reality from the inside, but I could see that there was a marketing effort there, which is not easy because you have to coordinate multiple people, blah, blah, blah. Everything has to come together because, again, if the website comes out 1 week later, it might be nice. It's not as useful from that perspective. So I see there a clear intent of making this a good launch, which is great. And as I said, also, like, I agree. I think it's something that it's necessary and it's good to get right. But at the same time, I can't help but see this as a red flag when you do this and you burn out your core contributors. Like, I read the retrospective, and if one critique is that, in my opinion, it should have stated more clearly that the website is a marketing tool, shut up. On the other hand, and maybe this is, how can I say, something that should have been said that wasn't, in my opinion. On the other hand, there are some comments in there that I don't understand, and I can't help but think that there is something wrong with them. One in particular was a point in the retrospective blog post about a discovery that you need to not burn out people first and foremost. How can you not know that? Can you explain this? And sorry, just one last thing. And again, I'm raising these concerns in a very, I don't know, I don't want to be a hater, but from the outside, I am confused by the events. I can't find an explanation, and this is where my mind goes.
Yeah. I think there's a ton to unpack, and some of my memory is just going to be fuzzy from that time. So I was helping out in 2018, but um, yeah, my perspective is just my personal perspective.
Sure.
So let's unpack at least a little bit of that. So the first part you were saying was around the timeline for the website. So the burnout was across not just the website, but across the teams. So
Yeah.
everyone was pulling as hard as they could to get ready for 2018. And different teams felt it differently, but
Mhm.
the end result was a lot of strain, especially on the core team, folks on the core team, and folks on very public facing parts of the Rust project. So the website and whatnot. So the strain of shipping, there's a cost. And if you're not used to what that cost is going to feel like, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to overshoot in terms of how much you can commit your energy to a project. If you've never burned out before, you don't know where that line is. And I feel like a lot of people that were working on Rust were young
Mhm.
and may never have actually exhausted their reserves in such a way that they experience real burnout. So this might have been the first time for a lot of folks that said, "Well, I really want Rust to succeed," and that's a really admirable thing. Like they really want to, give their heart and soul into this project, but they don't know how to pace themselves. They don't know the signs for burnout. They don't know, wow, I'm waking up and I'm feeling a little iffy about jumping back in, but I'm going to do it because we need it. And they don't know that that's like 6 steps down the road of burnout, and they're already that far down that they don't even know it. Um, so and actually I want to say this too for people that are listening that haven't experienced it. learning to check in with your body and learning to feel in your body where burnout begins. If you've never burned out, maybe you won't know what that feels like. But in hindsight, that'll be one of the things that you'll need to learn. Um, and so, as a retrospective, if you're looking backwards, as a community, as a organization, what are the signs of burnout in that organization? What are the signs of burnout in the members of the organization? How hard can you push in order to succeed and not, burn out your team at the same time? So it's exactly. So
Hmm.
knowing that it's not like if you ship a 2018 that's like twice as awesome, but you lose half the people, that's probably not a net win, right?
Yeah.
Um, but organizationally, you may not realize that's what you're asking people to do is to give up any future participation in this project just to ship this particular version. So as an organization, you have to learn how to successfully year after year ship, and also when you need to push harder, how not to push so hard that you have nothing left in the tank and you actually have to leave. So I think that it sounds like you're saying it sounds a little suspicious, but think of it not as one person, but as a whole organization that has to experience and learn how to ship at this level and to market at this level. Um, and the kind of toll that that might take if you strain the organization as a whole in that
Okay.
process.
So I think probably a good way of saying this from a perspective that we can understand from the Z community is probably not that is that we are used to seeing Rust being so effective at so many things that we build an expectation that the level of sophistication is all the way up there for everything, while in reality it's
Right.
not. And for Zig it's the same, because we get people that get really angry and disappointed by Zig because they see certain things as being very well developed and effective even today. For example, cross compilation and comp time and other stuff, and then they get absolutely disappointed by, for example, the lack of good documentation for the standard library. But the reality is that that's where we are. We are super young, and
Yeah.
some things are
Right.
weirdly sophisticated, but that's not where that's not where we are in reality. So some people build up wrong expectations based on that.
Yep. And I think as a organization or as a project, you're just going to mature different speeds in different areas, and that's life.
Hmm.
It's run by humans, and humans have flaws, so the project's going to have flaws as well. So that's just going to be a forever truth.
I see. I think that was a great point. Yeah, I can totally see that now. Um, well, um, okay, let's talk about another problematic thing about Rust.
Okay.
No, I'm joking, but so this is interesting because we haven't experienced that in the Zig organization yet, in the Software Foundation, and it's gonna come. And at least now we know. Maybe we can avoid this one. Maybe not. We'll see. But that was yeah, that's good to know. So another thing that I think we should totally talk about. Um, you tell me if you want maybe to give a bit of context on this. Otherwise, I can give some, but you might know this much better than me. Um, there's generally a perception that Rust has um, some part of the community that is way way too much into Rust in an unhealthy way,
Yeah.
and people talk about this Rust evangelism strike force, and to be fair, I've heard similar complaints also about Zig, not as much, but Zig is super tiny compared to Rust, obviously. And to be also fair, the latest comment that I heard about this was somebody complaining about Andrew talking about Zig. So I mean, like, just let the guy talk about Zig. God damn it. Like, but anyway. So I don't know. Like, can you maybe tell to the audience about what happened with Arctics and your opinion on that?
Oh yeah. Let's do the first question first, and then we'll talk about Actix
Sounds
after
perfect.
that.
Yeah.
So the Rust Evangelism Strike Force is a meme that some folks created, and as with any meme like that, there needs to be just enough truth that it kind of hooks
Yeah.
and kind of sticks around. Um, and the early adopters for Rust were very passionate. Like, here's a language that, for the first time, there really hadn't been a language that really pushed safety that hard, but also gave you that performance. I mean, I don't need to sell Rust. I think Rust is pretty established at this point, but back then it wasn't, right? So people felt like they had to kind of give the message, tell
Yeah.
everyone about um, the good news, and that there was a good intention there, but the early adopters were very passionate, and I think, thanks to the early adopters, Rust built momentum early on and managed to establish itself inside of Mozilla. So they actually had people working on it full time, and that really did help Rust become a real thing. So I think that that's really important. By the same time, there was this this kind of negative effort. And I think they just people did it for lulz at the beginning, but then it became a slightly more nefarious where people would pretend to be Rust evangelists or pretend to be Rust enthusiasts and go and evangelize Rust into different corners of the world in a way that was abrasive. Um, they weren't sometimes, and quite often, they weren't even part of the Rust community. Like, these are people we'd never heard of, and they just show up, and for giggles they would just spam in someone's issue tracker, hey, you need to rewrite this in Rust. And that itself became a meme, this whole rewrite it in Rust thing, which is why um, it's not, people in the community would not go and tell people to go rewrite it in Rust. Like, most of the community knew better, but I think that either people that were fringe or people that were doing it in a more nefarious way were actually causing this friction. I think that actually did hurt Rust in the earlier years. People were saying, like, what is going on? What is Rust? Why are people coming onto my issue tracker? Why are they saying that I need to rewrite my software? This is stupid. Um, and yeah, some of it is kind of the 4chan crowd having a laugh and trying to bring down Rust. I mean, if you look at people on the Rust project, so some people were politically left, and that's just kind of a historical fact about Rust. And some of the crowd that didn't like Rust didn't like that people were political left in the project, and that caused like a group of people to rise up and to play these meme games. Um, yeah, I think it took a while to overcome that particular thing, this whole, evangelism strike task force or strike force or whatever they called it, um, around Rust, is to actually say, no, Rust is quite serious. Rust is not for lulz. Like, we're not going and trying to spam every issue tracker. That's a whole group of people that are doing it for laughs. Like, we're just going to stay the course. We're going to actually, prove that Rust on its own merits is good. And I think that um, with enough, staying the course and doing that, people got tired of this whole laugh they were having with this strike force thing. And that began to peter off. Like, people just stopped doing that. And that was good. At the same time, we're spending time on places like Reddit to say, do not do this. Do not go onto issue trackers and spam people like this. So if you are one of those people and you were doing it with good intentions, do not do that. And I think that, so some of the people that I would consider more fringe or whatnot, were starting to get the message that this is not a cool thing to do. Yeah, I don't being the target of some kind of like broad harassment is kind of just a strange thing that a project would pick up trolls like that, but it happens, I guess. Um, and hopefully Zig never really gets to that point where they pick up trolls like that. Your other question was around Actix, and I think that Actix is an unfortunate turn of events. It just is. And for people that are watching that maybe haven't heard of this, I'll give a recap of what happened with Actix, which is the Actix developer. So Actix is an actor-based system in Rust, so you can do kind of Go-like things where you can start up actors and send messages and that kind of stuff. Actix was designed in such a way that it would be extremely fast, and to do that, there was some uh, uh, use of unsafety in Rust. So in Rust, you can drop out of having all the strict checks and remove some of the checks, and it gives you the safety closer to something like a C++. Um, and you can do optimizations that are slightly, they're just unsafe, as the keyword says. And Actix had done a fair number of these unsafe optimizations. And as a result, when people saw the benchmarks, they were really excited about Actix. And when they saw the code, they're like, whoa, there's a lot of unsafety in this. I don't know if all this unsafety is actually sound. Like, is behavior sound at runtime? Are there any runtime issues? And no one knew. So it started, I would say, again, it started in a way that was not ill intentioned, I would say. So one person jumped in and said, "Hey, there's a lot of unsafety. Can anyone else jump in and help review this code?" And so people that had more Rust experience, more experience with unsafe areas of Rust, jumped in, did a code review, wrote up a code review, and I think that caused a snowball. One of the problems as your community grows, especially if there's kind of like forums or whatnot where a lot of people are sharing their time and energy. Pile-ons are very easy to happen, and it's not like people intend to necessarily cause a problem, but if one person criticizes and another person comments on that and another person comments on, then all of a sudden you have like 100 comments of this is bad. And it's like, yeah, you don't have, just click like, just don't cause more of this pylon at the same time. But what unfortunately happened was that I don't know if it started on Reddit or started on the GitHub uh, project for Actix, but there was quite a long thread about people saying like, this is bad. Why did we trust Actix? There's so much unsafety. And then people reviewed the code and are like, well, some of the use of unsafe is actually really bad. What should have happened, well, it's hard to say what should have happened. I think both sides butted heads, and the end result was a pylon that was far larger than it should have been.
Mhm.
And the end result is the creator of Actix. I don't know if it was Actix
I think it was like
proper
six web.
Actix Web. Yeah, that sounds right. That he just left. He just like, okay, I'm done. I'm done.
Yeah.
Someone else can take over this project. I'm done. And yeah, this is definitely something that can happen if people don't realize that what they're doing, like what they're speaking out into the world, is not in a vacuum, right? They're contributing to a negative energy that, even though they think they're well intentioned, their action is actually quite terrible. And when you stack 150 of those on top of themselves, it's so heavy that, if you are the author of this package, you're looking at this going like, why do I have any incentive to continue working on this thing? What motivation? It's gone at this point. Like, you've completely snuffed it out. Whereas, bringing the author along and saying like, "Hey, do you take PRs? Can we fix this if so long as we maintain the performance that Actix has?" And then, little by little chipping away at whatever you feel like needs to be updated. You know, that takes more coordination. That might have got us a better end result. But if you don't know what you're doing as a community member, you can make things quite bad. Whether it's the Rust Evangelism Strike Force or whether it's this Actix example that you brought up of being well-intentioned, but also completely toxic at the
Mhm.
same time, and that's totally possible if you don't realize, like, what is the end result that you want to cause.
Okay. Uh, so I find it interesting that you are mentioning these two events as completely unrelated, and in my mind there was a relationship between them, and that's why I kind of bundled them in a question. And so maybe I'll share a little bit more of my point of view, and maybe you can tell me where you think that as usual, right? I'm the outsider, and I have this wrong perception of how things actually work, and also I have questions afterwards about um, maybe things that the Rust um, governance team did to try to stop this that we don't know about. So the reason why I bundle them together is because it gives me the impression that, okay, you mentioned the meme being pushed also by people not in the community at all. I have to say that we have never been targeted by any kind of memeing by for Chan, G, or whatever. Um, and by the way, your comment kind of makes me want to be proactive there. I'll go there, meme, try to make it cool. I don't know how. uh,
That's definitely you. I'm not touching that stuff.
um, yeah, I mean, 4chan was never good. Like anybody that knows 4chan knows that 4chan was never good. But anyway, um, the idea is, to me, what it seems like is that there are some people, and by the way, we have in a very, very minor version the same thing a little bit also not in the Z community, but as you said, in the fringes of it, people not involved at all with the core stuff, who kinda learn super simplified um, versions of what we have and assume too much and completely miss the nuance because they never wrote one freaking line of Z code. They don't know anything. They just read I don't know, a line from the Z front page or from my blog post that said something in passing, and for them that's the absolute truth. And I feel like Rust has the strength and problem that the borrow checker is an amazing idea. I remember it captured my imagination a lot when I first heard about it way in the past. And I feel like there's a lot of people that never write one line of Rust, never get involved with anything. They just learn this, and or maybe they're young and dabble a little bit in Rust, but they're super young. They don't know how to program,
Right.
and so they come up with this absolute understanding of what the borrow checker does, and armed with this simplified understanding of something, start slashing, like start hammering at everything, everywhere.
Right.
So that's why to me this was more in a continuum because I can see this as the rewrite it in Rust meme from non-malicious parties, and also the remove all unsafe because you want to reach perfection, even though that's not
Yeah.
perfection.
No, I think you're right. I think that and use the term absolute, and I think that that is reminds me of absolutism, like this idea that there's somehow some platonic truth about how things should be designed in the world. And if I just knew what it was, like, then I would have the magic key. Oh, it's the borrow checker. It's how Rust works with this borrow checker. That's the magic key. And one, there is no such thing. Sorry. There is no such truth that is of some platonic truth about how things should be engineered in the world. Um, but you're right in that if you don't have the experience or you haven't come to the realization that there is no such truth, that it's easy to latch on to something like, oh, Rust will save us all. Let's rewrite it. Let's unsafe is funny in the sense that if you come to Rust, you're already on the rails in terms of like adopting this mentality that safety is good, because clearly that's like one of the virtues of Rust. So it feels like a virtuous act to say, "Hey, you're using a lot of unsafety, but virtue says be safe, so be safe." Um, and it doesn't have the nuance of like, okay, yeah, but Does it have to be safe like 100% right now, right this moment? No. Is this something that we can roll out over the next year and help them merge some changes so that in the next big release that it's most of the unsafety is fixed? Possibly. Is it their project to write as much unsafety as they want and do whatever the heck they want with the code base?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, remember that part too. So I think
Yeah.
that that's when we're coming to it, come to good intentions, but also come to recognize that you are not in control. Like you are not in charge. This is their project. This is what they put their time into, and come as gingerly as possible that you can, gently present your ideas rather than crushing them with a hammer at the same time.
Yeah. Makes total sense. So how if I think of myself, if let's say that we kind of, I don't know, switch roles or something, like I am VP of community but at the Rust Software Foundation back then,
Okay.
how do I stop this? I can say today that whenever I see somebody trying to do this with Zig, I'll fucking murder them. Like I don't have problem picking fights with people on Twitter and other stuff. So that's one thing. But that might very well be not enough. And I'm sure that the Rust Foundation people in there knew about this and tried to stop it. Was it too much? Was
Yeah,
it impossible to
I
stop
think
it?
we recognize. I'm not going to speak for the community team or the moderation team, as I was not part of either of those teams when this was happening, and I'm sure they had their own conversations about this. Um, I got a sense that it happened very quickly. Like the pile-on happened, and then you woke up the next morning and it was already too far down the road. Like there's enough damage done at that point that it's like, okay, how do we roll back from here?
Yeah, these are exponential phenomena. So
What's that?
these seem to me all exponential phenomena. So they're hard to contain once they reach very quickly a
Yeah,
certain stage.
right. Um, to how do you prevent it? I feel like there's a few things to help prevent, but I don't know of anything that would strictly prevent it. But a project, so one of the kind of things that I keep in the back of my mind is that a project reflects the DNA of the owners, of the people that created it. And which means like all the people involved with Zig or Rust at the time need to behave in such a way that they would not have done this. And that helps the next layer around them take on these personality traits of like, well, if so and so wouldn't have done it, in the back of your mind, as you make the decision, you're like, I feel a little uncomfortable about this because it's now you're deviating from what the set of personality or set of behaviors that the core folks do. Um, that's one thing that's going to help, and I think there is some of that in the Rust community, where the core folks are very generous, caring people, and the people around that really wanted to take a step back and say, "Hey, maybe it went too far." Right? So some of that is like that introspection. Now, they may notice that again 48 hours later than they should have, but maybe it happened so quickly that there was no way for them to catch it. Um, and I think another thing is to, if I can use the term like inoculate, um, a community needs to learn how to resist in terms of like I feel like I want to perform this behavior, and then I'm told like you're saying you would kind of take the stick to them and say, hey, don't do that. And I think having a sharp sense of the existing people that are the seniors, the elders in the community is saying like don't do that. Like when it happens, not in a cruel way, but in a way that says this is the line we hold, and you don't don't go beyond that because it's just not healthy. That's just not what we do here. And if people don't like to be told that and they move on, there is some self-selection that happens, and that's that just happens. But if you're doing it in a way that is not like necessarily causing more harm, but you're just saying, no, this is the line that we hold,
Mhm.
then hopefully the community picks up these traits. Um, and I'll also mention briefly, if people don't hold the line, or people don't, they have personality traits that make things not as good in a community, then the community will reflect those as well. So it's really important that it's the positive traits are the ones that you're kind of continually working on yourselves as people, so that what comes out is positively affecting the community, and you're holding the line, you're holding yourself to the same line you're going to ask everyone else to hold themselves to.
Yeah, makes total sense. I think that this particular problem of seeing, I don't think that, okay, I've seen already a few comments, let's rewrite this in Zig, but I don't think that rewriting it in Zig is going to be a disastrous meme, because I have plans about this, and
Okay.
I can spoil them for you. We already have started working on this, and the general idea. And by the way, this is my perspective, and I haven't consulted Andrew before coming here on stream. So again, just my perspective. But
Right. World announcement right here. Here we
yeah,
go.
but it's kind of very simple. Uh, Rewriting in Rust, I agree, it's a meme, and meme are powerful. And my plan is to piggyback on that meme and push forward the idea of not rewrite it in Zig, but maintain it with Zig. With the idea is where the idea is you don't rewrite every single C library under the sun in Zig for just for the sake of it. We have awesome interoperability. You just take whatever C things is already out there, and if you added a build.zig file to it so that you don't have to go crazy with make files and everything else. Maybe write a light wrapper if you want better idiom around the API. That's it. And you don't rewrite, you maintain. And maybe if you want to eventually move to a Zig implementation, compilation unit by compilation unit, file by file, you can do it. It's up to you. But the idea is we don't rewrite, we maintain. And I'm sorry, because my evil plan is based on riding the unfortunate Rust meme, but I think it's ideas are slow and weak, and memes and communication channels, it's what pushes them forward. And that's my evil plan for now.
Yeah.
Am I
And
bad?
it kind of reminds me, like, the original idea for what a meme was. Um, and this
The
it's
selfish
not
gene
yeah, it's not like, what was it, Dawson? What is his name? The scientist guy that wrote
from
Selfish Gene.
the selfish gene. Uh, oh man,
I'm
I'm
completely
so bad
blanking.
with names. People in chat will know for sure.
That one behind me.
Worst
But
case, I have it in the library behind me. Richard Dawkins.
Stock,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you, Gimli. Um, yeah, Richard Dawkins. So my understanding of the original idea is this notion that an idea can be contagious in a sense, like it can hop from
Self-replicating. Yes.
person, and then you can ride along with that something, change in behavior, some idea, and as it kind of goes from person to person, it kind of carries along this change in behavior. Um, there's a whole bunch we can talk about, like sociological aspects of that, and how that works. But I think you're right in that having a a contagious idea is going to help you, like, reach out to a broad audience with some, you know some pithy phrase or whatever, where they now think Zig, they think this other thing as well. um yeah, I think that's probably true. I also, my knee jerk, and I'll just kind of say this too, is that it's fine as long as there's other things that support, right? You don't want just the meme, because the meme is like, okay, you're doing propaganda at that point.
Yeah. Well, the meaning is
That,
it's a gadget.
yeah,
From
exactly. It's a mechanism, but the 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 actual thing is that you want people to make their own choice. You don't want to make the choice for them.
yeah.
Um, there's a book that I'll sometimes point people to that was written about propaganda in the 20s that is a complete brain melting book, and it completely scared me away from, like, recognize propaganda, but also, like, be very careful because we as humans are very susceptible to it. And I think it's better that the people that come because they are convinced that this is good. They don't come because you've drawn them by like a propaganda approach. Um, and again, that goes to building a good community of people that are free thinking. They come in, they decide that this is what they want to do on their own merit, on the merits of the
Yeah.
technology.
I personally hope that by being explicit and somewhat transparent about this stuff, I can hopefully pick the third choice between the public lie and the and the hidden truth, um, to a degree. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to choose one of the two. Well, actually, you have to resort to the duality. I mean, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see where this goes. And I don't know. I hope people in the Rust community. I do plan to push forward with this idea of maintain it with Zig. And I hope that people in the Rust community don't see this as an attack, but more like it's the meme is out there. At least we're making good use of it. And
Right.
and while I don't plan to be falsely in favor of Rust things that I don't like, I do think that we all have a ton of things to learn from Rust. Rust has really raised the bar for what a good programming language is, what a good governance model is.
Right. And I think too, you're talking about maintaining. I wanted to mention this too as well. Um, when I was working on TypeScript, the idea that you could take a code base and one file at a time, even move it to TypeScript rather than JavaScript, was one of the secret sauces for TypeScript, especially early on. So the first projects that adopted TypeScript like only did like one or two files, and that was it. And then they sat on that to see what that felt like. If we hadn't made that possible, they may not have even tried TypeScript. And this idea that you could introduce Zig into a code base and introduce it in such a way that, you know, it feels completely natural in that code base, and then people can dip a toe in Zig and say, "Oh, this is it's actually a little bit nicer to maintain than the C code. That's great. I'm just going to write this other little bit in Zig as well." And then it kind of, not in a way that's pernicious, but it just kind of naturally, gradually grows over time where people choose the ergonomics of Zig,
Mhm.
just naturally write that next file in Zig. I think that's a good hack.
Would you call what TypeScript was doing would be something along the lines of embrace, maybe not extend, but let's say improve?
Not a switch, no, but yeah, there was.
Because actually, to be fully honest, from my personal perspective, I do think that the idea of maintaining with Zig in a small sense is the same technique, or somewhat in the same ballpark. You embrace, you not extend in this case because the I think the meaning of extend when applied to Microsoft in the past was about breaking away from standards in a
Right, right,
very
right,
negative
right.
way. In this case, it would be more like embrace, improve,
Yeah, embrace, enhance
embrace,
something.
enhance, and like yeah, I don't remember the third part. We'll see when we get there.
Yeah, maybe we'll come up with a third one. But yeah, I think that there's something to it where it's Zig is intended to be like a friendly counterpart,
Yeah,
and that friendly counterpart is just happy to have along, and it works with everything, and it's really nice. And then you use it a little bit more, and you're like, I'm starting to do projects on the weekend with this thing. And
yeah.
then the next week, you're starting to write code at your company with it. So
And I think that if you want to be real about like the industry, everybody has a inherits legacy code bases, and it's most often than not it's genuinely stupid, the idea of I have to rewrite everything from scratch without any form of
yeah,
increment.
I mean, and that's why rewriting in Rust was never an official thing because anyone that's done any serious development in in industry would you look at these systems, rewriting them is such an effort. You would absolutely never. So yeah, rewrite parts of it if you can. Awesome. Start new projects. And in fact, I think that's generally what people do. And this may not be a blanket truth for everyone, but I think a lot of companies, when they pick up Rust, they pick it up in a way where they write the new thing. It's a small project. We'll do an experiment,
Yeah.
right? And that is where they get their acknowledge and experience and fold it into their tool chain and their build systems and just kind of build from there. So it's you don't really see a ton of rewriting it in Rust. In TypeScript, we did see people largely that was progressive, right? So people would roll parts of the code base onto TypeScript and then grow, grow, grow. Um, there was a team that took their whole code base, took 2 engineers, and then over 2 weeks moved the
Mm.
entire,
Yeah.
350,000 lines of JavaScript to TypeScript, which to me was like, okay,
Well, I guess that for
cool,
these people,
what to do. But that's a spike and a half right there.
yeah, I guess for these people, maybe I'm trying to think from again, this is an outsider perspective, but I guess for certain companies, yeah, the fact is that like with TypeScript, you're moving from untyped JavaScript to typed to a typed language, which is night and day. And also, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like TypeScript is, if you are a C# company, you want TypeScript. You don't want JavaScript. TypeScript is like, it's so much more similar. You can that the things that you know to do with C#, it seems to me that they transition much more nicely to TypeScript than they do with like containers, dependency injection, name it.
I think that's probably true. That was definitely more true early years for TypeScript. Modern TypeScript is just one step away from JavaScript. Like you can take JavaScript, treat it as TypeScript, and then lay types into that more optionally
Mm-hmm.
um, than very early versions. I feel like the early versions kind of leaned you in a direction of writing with classes and writing more OO and that style. But experience with the JavaScript frameworks. So, working with Angular, with Ember, and these other folks that adopted TypeScript, Vue as well, that it's better to feel natural in JavaScript. So I feel like, yeah, you're right at first, C# flavor, and then that over time has
Okay.
largely given way to being more broadly approachable to the JavaScript
Oh
community.
yeah, that's for sure. I was just thinking about my experience in my company where people that spend their entire career saying, no, I don't care about the front end. I just want to do backend in C#, like hardcore C# people that know all the ins and outs, all the stuff that I never wanted to learn. They kind of like TypeScript to the point that they went from, oh, I'm a backend guy and never do front end, to actually kind of occasionally taking a peek, sending one, two
Right.
commits. It's fine. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it helped too that Anders created C sharp, and then Anders was the architect for TypeScript. So Anders Hellsberg, created, Turbo Pascal and all these other things too. So
Mhm.
um, seeing he's a designer with a very particular aesthetic. There's been only a couple of designers like this in programming language history. I would say Niklas Weird is another one, but Anders is a kind of a rarefied designer in this form. His sense of aesthetic, his sense of what it's like as a developer to use the language that you're designing in real time is unreal. Especially, I've been in many design meetings with him, and his ability to see what it's going to feel like to use it is very special. So yeah, I could see that carrying into people
Mhm.
that picked up TypeScript. They're going to feel his fingerprint in it.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Let's two final questions, and then it's been 2 hours. How are you? First of all,
I'm good.
are you good?
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Um. So the first question would be, I don't think that. Yeah, as I said, I think we are never going to have too much of a rewrite it in Zig meme, like to get to a dangerous point, partially because of what I mentioned earlier, but also partially because I think that in the general Zig ethos, in the way we generally think about software, at least from my perspective, we do place the how can I say, the fact that it's your software, you design it the way you want, and there is no one metric which is absolutely preferable over others. You're always juggling between different constraints and different needs, and you have to find one sweet spot, and there are multiple depending on what you want. So I don't think this is going to be a big problem, but maybe there is one problem already and I don't see it because I am in the language, or maybe there will be. I don't know. Do you feel like there is? Can you see the starting of our own big community problem?
I can't say I see anything that's like a community problem.
Be ruthless.
Um,
That,
I would say so. Some of the stuff that comes up for me, and I actually, Andrew and I like had a chat, a month or two ago. I kind of pulled out and said, "Hey, there aren't a ton of us that have grown programming languages before. Open door if you ever want to chat." And we sat down and chatted, and we chatted partly about, I just used Zig for the first time and was digging through the documentation and was like absorbing what I had experienced. And there are things like, and I'll just mention a couple. One was like the Unicode support that jumps out at you as like,
yeah.
huh,
State your point.
that's going to be painful in the future. And it's there are certain things that when people look at a language, they're going to look at, and that is one of those that people are going to look at, and it's going to
Mhm.
strike them as like, I don't know if this is serious yet. And that's just kind of an honest, like, they're just doing a gut check looking at the project. That doesn't mean that you have to bake in a bunch of support into the language itself and like add a bunch of new character types and all this kind of stuff. But having a solution where it's like, yeah, okay, Rust does, you know, whatever version of Unicode it supports. And, we can talk about that. It's not perfect. So I will be the first to admit that, the first thing I did when I was writing like the line editor project recently was, okay, yeah, it gets us to this point. Then I'm going to go start downloading new crates that actually do full support for Unicode. But having a solution, having a answer to that question rather than go figure it out yourself is going to be a better landing place for a lot of developers. And I think that there's a couple of things like that as they come in. Um, and defer, if I pick on defer just a second, defer is great. It's great. But do I have to write it all the time? Can't you just infer the defer sometimes? So
Kind of like
there's
a
things.
RIIR system. Is that what you're
Yeah,
hinting at?
yeah,
Okay.
right, exactly. Or I mean, in Objective C, they went through this thing while I was there at Apple. We didn't really talk about that, but Objective C was going through this automatic reference counting inference, like a way that you write the code in such a way that what comes out, you don't have to have as much boilerplate. Like you can detect it statically that this is the form that they're using. So I'm just kind of throwing that idea out there as well. I don't think that's as big a deal as the Unicode one. The Unicode one, just when you first come to it, it just feels like, hmm, if I were to write an international system with this that had full, localization, this is going to hurt. And um, that's if you want to start thinking about what does Zig 1.0 look like, what is a Zig that potentially companies would adopt, finding things like that is going to pop up in your surveys, especially if you're doing surveys of companies. They're going to notice stuff like that as well.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying I have a solution, but I think they're probably knowing the cleverness of the community behind Zig and the people designing it. There is a solution sitting there that is the Zig solution for Unicode that feels natural and feels lightweight and will compile quickly. that is different than the Rust solution. Um, but I think that there does at least need to be one. And I guess one of the other things too, if you look at communities that haven't done this, and do I want to pick on anyone in particular? All
Yeah.
this is public. So when the D programming language was 1.0, they had two standard libraries, and to my mind, that hurt them quite a bit. So until they actually standardize what their standard library was, rather than saying, "Hey, just pick and choose which one you want," um, then it's hard to build momentum. Like the analogy I think of is if you're building a building, it's far easier to build from the 15th floor than from the first, right? You're already up to the 15th floor. But if, as a developer, I have to choose which standard library or which of the 12 partially supported Unicode packages,
Hmm.
I'm doing a ton of extra work that is not solving my problem. So anything that gets me to the point where I'm just solving my problem rather than having to think about stuff that isn't my problem, then I see that as, yeah, that's good support for the developers,
That
and
makes
that
total
will make
sense.
it.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. Um, we'll see. Any other complaint that you want to file?
I need to go back. So I did that stream. I poked on Zig a little bit. One of the things that I do when I learn programming languages is to write a Nintendo emulator in them. I've
Hmm.
written a lot of Nintendo emulators. So at some point, I'm sure I'm going to pick up Zig and actually sit and write an emulator in it, because that really gives me a chance to kick the tires a little bit better in a project that I'm very familiar with. That's also kind of fun.
Makes sense.
Um, oh, speaking of which, I think I did try to start that the other day, and the STL support was like I wasn't sure which game library or which SDL or something like that. So
Hmm.
maybe I need to actually sit down and play with that a little bit more.
I see. Um, yeah, makes sense. Let's see what people are saying about us commenting on Zig. No, I think people are fine in chat mostly. But yeah, no, I think your point about different choices and that is makes sense, especially for Unicode. We need to have a strong story, and um, we'll see when we get there, or I don't know. We have our own opinions, I guess, on this. So I would say enough about this. So tell me, what do I need to know before I go out there and start telling people re-implement this for Nushell? What do I need to know?
Wait, re-implement this in Nushell?
Yeah, for Nushell, right? Because if I understand correctly, Nushell, like normal shells, I should not be the one saying this, so please repeat it
Okay.
afterwards in the nicer, in the correct way. But if I remember correctly, normal shells are based on the idea that everything is text and you manipulate this text, but then you keep doing reparsing over and over the same damn thing, where you could say, well, what if these different programs pipe data between each other in a more structured way, right? And I think that's the main selling point of Nushell.
Yeah, I would say that. So I'd say that there's the current state of Nushell, and then there's like the aspirational state of Nushell.
Mm-hmm.
The current state of Nushell is very much in lines of something like PowerShell, but more functional, a little bit lighter weight. Um, in some ways, it's getting a bit faster, which is kind of fun too. Um, and this is something where you can pick it up, and while you're, navigating around in your system, you can create a pipeline. And now we're starting to add script support. You can actually create scripts, and those run just like a Python script. So there hasn't really been a shell that is also a programming language at the same time. Like some aspire to that, like PowerShell maybe kind of aspires to that, but nothing has really been something that is Python plus Bash exactly, kind of merged together in such a way that you can take, you can start a pipeline on your command line and then grow that into a program. Uh, and it feels very natural to do that. So that's one of the aspirations for Nushell is to actually be that language shell hybrid that actually is quite natural to work in both.
Sorry, I have
Uh,
a dumb question about this. Why wouldn't Bash qualify in the description?
so so I come from a language design background. The other folks that joined, I mentioned Yehuda comes from a language design background. Andreas doesn't, but he's got a lot of experience with different systems. And what we wanted was something that feels natural. Like you look at the code and it feels like a programming language. It feels like designed for you to write large systems in it.
Okay.
Bash is not designed. It doesn't feel natural. It
Okay.
doesn't look like something you'd want to like write a large script in.
Okay, so I was thinking of Bash as a bad programming language, but you're not even thinking of it as a programming language at all. Like it doesn't even reach that bar from your perspective.
I mean, you could say it's a bad programming language. It
Okay.
just wasn't intended to be used at that level. It wasn't
Hmm.
designed to be at that level. And so things that we do in New Shell would be, tracking of where data comes from so that you can give error highlights for where the data came from and how it was trying to be used as a type that it wasn't. Things like this where you use it and it feels like, oh, this is actually a language. This is pretty serious. And that's the complete intent, is that it feels like fully designed as a shell experience. And one of the things that we're hoping to do as well before 1.0 is to give you a notebook experience as well. So you can pull open a visual notebook and have bits of code and see graphical outputs for those bits of code.
How are you
So
doing
this,
this? Like because normally, so you're breaking away from terminal emulators.
yeah, I mean, in a sense, 95% of Nushell is just keeping data in its structured form. Rather, like you were saying, the traditional Unix pipes turn things into text and then you deserialize on the other end of the pipe or parse it and then hop, hop, hop through this pipeline and you lose all this structure. Where in Nushell, we parse into this structure and we have structured data, like a way of saying, yeah, this is a field and this is an int and this is a decimal number, etc. And all of that can be shown to the user in completely different ways. Right now, we just print it into a table. There's no reason that can't be shown to the user in a variety of graphical ways based on what it looks like and the shape of it. We also track where the data came from. So, for example, let's say you loaded it from a JSON file or it from a PNG file, right? So you load all this data, and we can say, all right, when we visualize it, if we know that this is PNG data, or we sniff through the binary and see this is PNG, let's just display it to the user. So if you have Nushell on your system and you haven't tried this before, if you have installed with like all the features available and you open a PNG, it's going to draw the PNG in the terminal just for fun.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not useful, it's fun. But the idea is that in a notebook, this may actually be part of the useful way that you use the system. It's like you're navigating around your file system, you open a JSON file, you get structured data out, you manipulate that JSON data. It gives you a link to some charts, and then you can print out those charts in your notebook. And all of that is all in Nushell. You're never leaving Nushell. I started one of my friends from Microsoft is a big Emacs guy, and his endless enthusiasm for Emacs is starting to pull me back into Emacs and really appreciate what Emacs is as a system. Like it's a whole system for solving a broad range of kinds of things in your computing experience. And more that's beginning to infect what I want in new shell to sit in a broader way than strictly being a programming language, strictly being a shell. Like that, there's a lot that it can do with all that structured data, and in a way that reaches a much broader audience. I'm definitely looking forward to making that possible in the future.
I see. That's very interesting. I have two comments on this. One is, I think that this idea of trying to break away from text to something more structured is something that I don't know. It seems to be a bit of a topical idea as of late. Like, for example, in the handmade community, uh, at the latest handmade conf, there was this presentation by Dion Systems. By the way, Abner is in chat and will probably be able to correct me and add links to everything, where they want to do this um, as a programming language plus IDE plus like let's say tooling. So the idea is that you don't write just straight up source anymore, but like your source becomes something more structured, like a bunch of like I don't know the details, and probably not all of them are in place already. But as a simplified version, you can think of it as every single declaration becomes a node in a graph, and whenever you mess around with the code, you're messing around with one node. You're not messing around with everything. So you free yourself from problems where, for example, you forget to close a parenthesis, and now everything looks like garbage to your parser. So that's a very, I think there is a connection there. It's an interesting idea that other people are
Yeah,
exploring.
I think so too. And there's actually, I would love to kind of brainstorm with Abner after this. I'm going to go look at this Dion Systems thing that he mentions, but this idea of there's more structure. There's a lot of kind of the experience of creating experiences for developers that largely is behind um, Microsoft's doors. There's a ton of people that have made IDEs for many years and experimented with ways to make them interactive. Now you may see the fruits of that as Visual Studio, but that is just one fruit of the labor. There's been tons of experiments that unfortunately just haven't been public. And yeah, that's in the back of my mind too, is that the way that you design compilers, the way that you design what the tool is that gives this IDE experience can be completely different than we would have done in like the 70s and 80s. Like if we just made straight line compilers back then, that is not how we should think about them these days. We have so much information about your program, so much information about like how things relate to each other, what you might have intended to have done, and can give you much better errors, much better feedback, and maybe push it even further than that. I think that sounds awesome.
Um, yeah, and yeah. And this is definitely interesting. I mean, um, I'm curious to see how this proceeds. I think there's a lot of the design space is huge and it's complicated. On one end, if I want to be, I think that like the default pessimist or like peanut gallery position on this is that like it's hard to beat strings. Strings are extremely powerful and they are in a sense like the ultimate worse is better thing in computer science, in my opinion. And it's hard to beat that strength. But yeah, I think that what I particularly like about the Dion system stuff is that, and again, as an outsider, I don't know all the details, but this idea of doing like let's say graphical programming, like decomposing not just text but like doing something more structured different, has been explored in the past already. I think that the key there is finding the perfect balance between text and its extreme power and taking away a little bit of that power so that you get the properties that you want, because we have all the clicky things, graphical programming languages. I mean, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna be unfair with a very short comment, but I think they're not great, generally speaking. I'm sure there are certain cases, certain situations where they can be effective and powerful, but nobody is, as far as I know, is like a professional programmer just doing that. You just type code. And I think that what's very nice about those, okay, you can correct me in a moment.
True. Yeah, I think that's maybe a misconception that all code is text,
Mm-hmm,
but there's a particular graphical programming language called LabVIEW,
mm-hmm.
and I don't think a lot of people outside of software engineering have really played with it, but it's actually pretty common for different types of engineers outside of the software engineer discipline to use something like LabVIEW to create their experiments. And they get really sophisticated with this, and it's a completely graphical language where you're drawing wires between boxes, and it looks like visual noise if you're not used to looking at it,
Hmm.
but it's successful.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
there's companies.
Somebody in the comments are talking about Unreal Blueprints, but do people really like Unreal Blueprints? Like, do people really like? Do engineers say, "Holy shit, I love Unreal Blueprints"? I don't know. By the way, I'm a bit skeptical, but uh, I don't know precisely. Like, it seems to me it's one of those things where there are maybe some corners where you have this, but you always fall back into the XML source or something like this. PLC stuff is often done graphical. Okay, I guess it's a between corner case. Okay. People are correcting me. That's fine. Take a look at this though.
It's
But
like,
wait,
yeah, it's just kind of outside of our experiences
yeah.
generally.
Take a look at this. How cool it is. This is the Dion stuff. It's text, but it's not text. I think this is magic.
Oh, cool. So this is like structured editing
Yeah.
of, yeah.
I think this is like really the key. You're not abandoning text completely. Because I really think the text at the end of the day it's too powerful. You cannot go completely away from it. It's like you're trading your keyboard and mouse for a joypad.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in a way, I think that's the right way to think of it. You're not far off. You know, there are structured editors for things like Emacs, and you know, because of the regularity of S expressions and Lisp, you
Mhm.
can navigate and edit that way. Um, in a language that feels like it leans towards natural structure because S expressions are just trees, right? Just serialized trees. So yeah, that definitely happens. My instinct there, and this is, Abner and folks that are working on this, I've probably already been thinking about this a lot more than I have, so I'll just kind of defer to them. But the muscle memory for being able to just reach out to my keyboard and hit a key and then text appears, uh, that can't go away. Like you're saying, there's a power in text that you need to be able to hold on to, and I think part of that power is not having to lose everything that I know to actually jump into the system. It's the same reason we were talking about TypeScript is nice because I can slowly adopt it a bit at a time. So if I can keep a lot of muscle memory and adapt to the system, that'll get me a lot further. Anyhow, just a thought.
Mhm. I think I had a second point. Oh yeah, I do. So that's interesting. So you mentioned all the graphical stuff that Nushell can do. How does that relate to? I mentioned earlier terminal emulators. So if I run Nushell, can I run Nushell in my own terminal emulator? When you enable graphical stuff, do I have to use your own embedded terminal emulator?
Yeah, the way to think about it is that in Nushell, everything is structured. So it's only the last second when we turn it into a visualization that you'll see. Um, in the terminal, the the viewer, if you will, that views the contents will be a terminal-based viewer. So if it's an image, it will draw it as as ANSI art, right? It'll
Mm-hmm.
just render that image as ANSI art. If it's structured data, it'll draw a table and draw the data inside the table. In the notebook, we have the ability to take the same data, right? No changes to the data, but then render that as HTML. So if we render that as HTML, then what you get is a much more graphical table that I can click on, or an image that actually is a full image that I can view, just as a normal image in a web page. So the idea of keeping everything structured as long as possible and not baking in any rendering into the system gives us the opportunity that wherever you embed Nushell, what you get back out is something like um, a viewer that feels natural for that particular environment, that particular host.
Okay, I see. So you have, let's say, multiple front ends, and the idea is that potentially you can adapt to different ones and make decisions based on that. I'm asking this because let me bring this link up. So for example, I've been writing a while ago chat client. You've probably seen it in Andrew's streams, in a bunch of people in the Z community. They are using this program called Borg, which is basically it's a Twitch chat client, but it's not an IRC. It's for the terminal, but it's not IRC. And for example, I support the Kitty graphics protocol, which is kind of cute. And I kind of like it. For me, the only real image need that they have is display emotes. That's pretty much it. But this thing is pretty powerful and can do a lot of things. Now, my question for you would be, would you? And I know that there are other terminal emulators that support different protocols. My question for you would be: is there an interest into somehow standardizing these and adopting external protocols, or publishing your own protocol so that other terminal emulators can implement it?
I would say for me personally, it's not necessarily an interest in standardizing something that goes beyond the terminal. Um, my interest is to have Nushell feel natural in the host that it's in. So, for example, having let's say a Kitty viewer,
Mm-hmm.
right? You could have a viewer that knows this Kitty extension to the terminal, and then can just take the data, and in those cases where it can call an extension instead, it can just do that. And really we can piggyback on, the work that they've done optionally. So the user could just, flip a switch and now they're in Kitty mode if they wanted to.
Right.
Someone was asking in the chat earlier, like, how can this be, like, how do you limit the amount that you're focusing on? And a lot of what we're doing is just to make Nushell extensible. So as a user, you can download some plugins or something, and maybe that plugin is View Kitty, something like this, where
Mm-hmm.
it replaces the viewer that's built in with this Kitty viewer, and then the user can just optionally choose that, download it, and then get this the Kitty experience.
I see. So you could also say that, by the way, the Abner also is working on his own terminal. Maybe you might want to check this out. I think there is probably some overlap between what Nushell does and what Abner. Abner, I guess, it's looking at this from the opposite end, right? He's looking at it from the perspective of the terminal emulator being, I don't know, less dumb. I don't have a problem, frankly, with normal terminal emulators.
Old, right? ANSY's.
Yeah.
I was doing BBSs and like 25 plus years ago, and ANSI was there, and VT100 is old too. I mean, it's natural for us to want to replace these things because what is there is gross.
Yeah.
That is the artifact of time and history.
Yeah.
Like, we have different systems than we had back then. We don't have to,
Mhm.
in ANSI, to know like the screen size or the cursor position, you write some string of random characters, and then you have to wait, and then you read back the answer. Well, good grief. That is not maybe the ideal. Maybe there's a better way to do it than that. But
Yeah.
it's old too, so that's just the way they did it.
I see. So maybe you might want to. I guess Abner maybe might want to check out Nushell and see what maybe could be what should be the cutoff point between where the terminal emulator starts and ends and where the shell should start and end. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, just pointing this out. I think this is another interesting point of discussion. Just like there is an overlap between what Dion's system is doing with structured text and what Nushell is attempting, I think there is some overlap here too.
Sorry, I just saw the comment. Enjoying Nushell on my teletype. Yes, yes, that's TTY. You're emulating a good old teletype.
Yeah. Wow, that was an amazing interview. Is there anything else that you want to go over?
No, I'm curious of what questions people have, if we want
Right.
to.
I'm sorry for dragging this long. I hope it wasn't too hard on you.
No, it's good. It's good.
Okay.
It's not often you can actually dive in and really get deep, and I think we actually had time to actually go into topics that we don't normally have time to.
Yeah. Okay, people, write your questions in chat. please be fast. Think of important questions because I grilled Jonathan for like 2 hours and a half. But yeah, it's your time to shine. In the meantime, while we wait, Jonathan, standard question. How did you find out about Zig?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, being a kind of a programming language nerd, I tend to keep my ear out for different languages, and it's more of a sampling. Like, it's how often do I hear about this thing? I'm not even sure where I first heard about it, but when enough people that I follow start to talk about it, or it comes up enough on my feeds, that's like, okay, I'll check this out. Um, I watch a ton of YouTube, like an embarrassing amount of YouTube and streams and stuff. So I've probably watched, um, I don't know. I don't know how many hours of content I watched before I was like, okay, yeah, let's try it out. So I think having that content, having the YouTube, um, I guess it's not YouTube. Andrew does not YouTube. He does oh, what is the heck is that
Well,
other
now
thing
it's
called?
Vimeo. Yeah.
Vimeo. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But having that content out there available so that, oh, okay, I can just follow some on Twitter and then there's a bunch of content. That's really where I think it attracted me. It feels like there's traction because people are talking about it, but also there's plenty of content that people like me can sit down and absorb, and say like it. It's not just the technology. We've been talking about how that the people involved are also people that you would resonate with, that feel like they're going to create something over time that really feels like a good thing to create. And so, like, I've watched tons of content, um, and it's not always going to be the case where I'm like, okay, this is good. But I feel like I got a good vibe, um, from the streams and the video recordings. I'm like, okay, this is good. I feel like if this continues to grow the way that it's growing, that'll be a good thing. So,
Mhm. Awesome. Um, I don't know. You have chat. You can pick the question that you want to answer.
all right,
Questions.
what do we have? What's next for JT's YouTube channel? I'm just going to keep going. What was that, Andreas? Yeah, I'm just gonna keep going. I have no idea. I thought I would plan ahead and say, "Oh, I'm gonna be a Rust training thing. I'm gonna be a this. I'm gonna be a that." Um, but no part of the channel has ever been premeditated enough to to actually uh, to do anything other than whatever is interesting. I'll just create content about that and move on to the next thing.
Well, I think you promised some Zig content earlier, so
Is that what I did? I think there's a fair chance that I will pick up um I'll pick up Zig again and do like a stream or do more videos about it, especially if I do that
I think you can
that
take
emulate.
your time. I've seen a few influencer people on Twitter sniff around Zig, but they're not biting yet. A
Yeah,
bit more time. You give us more time, and it's gonna be
yeah,
just right.
and I think too. I mean, for people that haven't sat and watched the arc of a programming language. A programming language is going to take like 5 to 7 years to hit 1.0 generally. I mean, these are long-term projects that it takes that time to build the momentum in the community and to get the technology in the state that it's ready for 1.0 and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a long game. When will it get Mr. C++ with Jason? Um, yeah, it took how many years for me to convince Jason to try out Rust? Yeah, good luck. Yeah, my cousin does C++ training. He's really, really good at C++, and I had to talk to him about Rust over 5 years or something before he actually picked it up for the first time. All right, what other questions we have? Uh, did I watch The Road to 1.0? Did I watch that video? I must have, but I'm blanking on what the content was in that video.
It's the one where Andrew says that he just started by removing macros from C, and then that's why he landed up in comp. I think that if you watched it, You would know, because maybe I'm wrong, but we kind of say that that's the video that when you watch it you get radicalized.
Okay.
Let me bring it up.
I mean,
Yeah.
in a way, Zig does have, it's not macros, but when you have static runtime or static build time um, ways of transforming code or ways of working with the code, that's not so different than macros.
Be careful with your choice of words. You
I
you
know.
remember, right? You remember the wall of no
I'm,
macros.
I'm speaking in like a 20,000 foot view, right? It's
Yeah.
when you squint far enough away, it's oh,
Uh,
here we go.
yeah. This is the talk, basically.
Oh yeah, I definitely saw this. I remember
Okay.
the Cherry Solutions logo.
Okay. Perfect. Then you are
Um,
radicalized. You don't know it yet. You're a sleeper agent for now. Okay.
that's right. Well, I mean, with these things, right? It's a little seed planted in the mind, and then it sprouts 2 years later, and you think it
Mhm.
was your idea the whole time. Um, all right, let's see. Open source communities overlap, thought as competitors. Do you think there are opportunities to interact to counteract that perception? I think we're trying. I mean, in some ways, me doing a Zig stream and you folks like jumping in and helping like help me learn and vice versa, like joining your talk show and talking about the Rust experience by showing that, people that are experienced in either side have no problems interacting with each other. I think that's probably a good starting point. What do I think about Rust support in the Linux kernel? I think that's awesome. I did not expect that to happen. I feel like and maybe people behind the scenes. I know that some folks at Intel and folks at Google and other places had been probably working behind the scenes to make this kind of make this possible. But from the outside, I didn't really see that coming. So when it was announced that they were going to add support and Rust was going to be the second language supported in the kernel, I think only at the drivers at first, but then kind of see how it works out over time. Um, I think it's awesome. I think if you look at Rust growth in the last, I would say 18 months, but you definitely feel it in the last 6 to 12 months that it's really starting to pick up quickly now. And an indicator like Rust in the kernel is like, who would have said that was possible 2 years ago? Like we would have never, I would have never said that. Okay, we'll see that in a reasonable time frame. But so many people are doing so much good work to make it possible to adopt Rust in so many places that now it's just starting to take off. I mean, I think video games, Abner probably knows this better than I do, but the video game industry, there are pockets in there that are starting to adopt Rust, and which is another place where I thought, no, there's going to be C++ till they die. There's no way. Um, and those pockets are, growing over time. It's not like widespread or anything. We're not going to make a big wave until there's like that game engine that really everyone wants to use, and then that will open the door. But seeing people move into places, and of course all the corporations announcing they're building their Rust teams in the corporation is another indicator of saying like, wow, this is really taking off. So I kind of see it more as an indicator to kind of come back to the question. It's a good indicator of Rust success. um Glad to hear that Jason was positive. In fact, I love Jason death, of course. What do you make of Rust error handling? Do you think it's generally possible to strike a good balance between informative and efficient errors? If you mean Rust, how Rust handles errors in code itself?
Yeah, I think it's related to a discussion that we are having lately about having right now errors in Zig as just error codes. And some people think that errors should also carry a payload. I personally will die on the hill where I think errors should just be error codes, but that's my personal opinion. And some other people think differently.
So are these errors generated by the compiler or errors that
No,
occur in user code that bubble out to the
user code being able to have errors carry a payload. Like there's a parsing error, and then you are in the error case in your match thing. Think about
Right.
like from Era's perspective, and then your error case can also carry a payload. We don't have that in Zig today, at least not embedded into the language. You can do that in userland.
Right. To be honest, I haven't really spent a ton of time there. Um, what we did for Nushell was we made kind of the one error type to rule them all. And it was just an enumeration of all the cases, all the styles of failure that could happen inside of Nushell. And that became shell error. And now every command speaks shell error. Every part of the system can output a shell error. And to my mind, it's not like that's baked into the language, but that is just once you go down that path and you absorb that one design choice, everything else kind of simplifies. Because in Rust, when you're using the question marks and you kind of immediately bubble out the error, if you have a single error type, it all unifies and just all bubbles up at that point. So it feels a bit more ergonomic. I know that some people, Jane Lesby and other people, are working on an ergonomic new uh, error handling thing for consumption inside of Rust, but I haven't really looked at it closely enough to have an opinion yet. I want to hear more about new. Apart from structured data, could you share other ideas you have about how to improve the shell UI? Shell is a REPL, that's true. Um, prompt kits, and yeah, there's a set of experiments where people were experimenting with more visual ways of doing the shell. I would love to experiment with that. I suspect that that's going to end up being post 1.0. There's a lot of work to even get new shell to 1.0 that is around like getting good auto completion. Like right now, people trying to move from fish to new shell is going to feel a bit of friction because new shell's auto completion is not as good as fish's. And, you know, the ergonomics matter. And if we don't hit at least fish's level, if not higher by 1.0, we've lost our opportunity. So there's stuff like that that I really need to focus down on. Now, if we have the opportunity to create our own terminal in the future, like a 2.0 or a 3.0, where we make our own terminal, and it can be something that merges text and graphics together, I think that'd be a lot of fun. Um, what do you think the future language that eventually replaces Rust will be focused on? Ooh, juicy question. So we all know that Rust will not be the language that rules the world forever and ever and ever, right? That is just history, right? We've seen a language comes up, and then over time it's king for a day, and then the next king comes along or the next queen comes along. And when I see Rust, I mean, we know that Rust is not always Rust may be influential. Rust may actually grow to be, a top 5 programming language and may sit there for quite a while. But at some time in the future, that may tail off. The kinds of stuff that I see replacing it um, would be some of the areas where Rust is currently weak, which is things like compile times, design time, types of things. If there is, this might sound a little speculative, but I mean, we don't know what the kinds of applications people are going to write in the future are like. So, say machine learning continues to take off, or say, um, we start really getting into virtual simulations and being able to describe, virtual reality is like really important, whatever it is. Um, this way of describing that new thing is going to probably take a new language that naturally fits inside of those new sets of use cases. So yeah, Rust is designed, but it's gonna in the future it's gonna design like it was designed for 2010, 2020, and it's 2050, and that's not what the world feels like anymore. And that's gonna show, just like it showed for C. What are some inspirations for new? I mean, I think things like PowerShell. Um, we all use like a variety of shells and a variety of programming languages. come from a variety of places. So I have a functional programming background and programming language design background. So I feel like there's probably at least 15, 20 different projects and whatnot, if not more, that folded into New. New has a plugin system, yeah. Yeah. So you can design new plugins in any language, and then they can participate in the Nushell language. So you can extend the Nushell language in any language.
There's a trick question in there for you, by the way.
Hint, hint. Should you write one in Zig? Um,
No,
Rust.
no, no, no. Well, continue answering. Feel free.
I was just saying, can you? I see. It seems like the next one. Can you imagine a project using both Rust and Zig together? Um, Possibly. So I just wrote an article about companies that are using Rust and Go. So they use Go for some things, they use Rust for other things. And we didn't see a lot in those companies. I know this is maybe was a cheeky question, but I'm giving you a serious answer. Um, Companies didn't do a lot of crosstalk between Rust and Go. They just used them where those particular languages were the strongest. And so in a single project, you may pick one language, but across the projects in your organization, you may have some in Go and some in Rust. And they just, naturally, if they're closer to the metal, they're going to pick the Rust. If they're changing a lot and they need to compile really quickly, they're picking Go. All right. And that was just one of the patterns that we saw. So I think that's probably going to be true too for Rust and Zig. Maybe there's going to be bridges that we can make in the future to make that interoperate better. But I think there'll probably be a natural time when you're picking up Zig because of one set of constraints is like very Ziggy, and then one set of constraints is very Rusty. Um, I'll be interesting, and because Zig isn't like it's continuing to mature, and the full story of what it means to be Zig is continuing to develop. So I guess it's kind of speculation because it's possible that maybe in the future Zig is what you're picking up for 80% of your tasks because the set of design choices really fit with a broader set of applications.
So yeah, this was the trick question. I know that you're tired, but if you can, maybe stick around a little bit for the next talk. I think it's going to be interesting. One thing,
Cool.
I think that you raise a very good point with Go and Rust. One thing that I have to say, though, is that probably there are probably a ton of reasons why there is this vertical slicing. Some things are Go, some things are Rust, and there's not too much interplay. I think it's also because Go doesn't really like much the CABI. It's like there is support for it, but I don't know.
Right.
It doesn't seem like a focus.
I don't think so too. And yeah, I think that's probably true, which is why you don't see good crosstalk between them.
Yeah. Did we get all
Cool.
questions?
Yeah, that's some good questions.
Well, Jonathan, thank you very much. Sorry for keeping you this long. Sorry.
No worries. Thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Is there any final thing that you want to say before I finally let you rest?
I would just say keep going. I feel like Zig is, it has a spark. It has a direction. It has a way that it views the world that I think is and it's drawing people to it. And I think, that's really to me that's a good healthy indicator. And just like keep doing you. Keep growing and keep doing you. And you know I want to just like offer, if I can come on the show or whatever, but if folks want to reach out and say hi and have questions about anything I talked about in the stream or whatnot, and they have their own projects or Zig core folks want to reach out, I just want to leave the door open. Feel free to come and ask questions and brainstorm with me.
Yeah, sure. I think you've been already invited in both Discord servers. That's the both main Discord servers. Um, There's also an embedded one, I should say. Maybe I shouldn't call the Showtime a main one. There's an embedded one also. And these are not all the Zig communities out there, but I guess it's a good start. Well, that's great. So for people, if people want to watch more of your content, what should they do?
I see someone linked to there's a Twitch channel that I'll stream, and I'm still kind of figuring out like all the format or whatever. So just come if you like programming languages or operating systems. There's a Twitch channel that I talk about various things on, and sometimes I'll do coding with me kinds of stuff. And there's also a YouTube channel called Systems with JT, and from there you can watch the YouTube content. Um, and of course, follow me on Twitter, JNTRNR @JNTRNR, and you'll see all the announcements on Twitter as well.
Yeah, Matt, please add also the Twitter link since you shared the Twitch link. Thank you very much in chat. Awesome. Jonathan, it's been a great pleasure. I don't know, maybe next time we talk more about how Nushell has completely killed all other shells out there.
Oh, that would be fun. That'd be fun.
Awesome. So with this, I think we can go finally on a break. See you all in about 10 minutes for the second part of Showtime. Thank you very much.
Great. Bye, everyone.